The world was at peace after the Fourth Great Ninja War, but Naruto Uzumaki had to face a harsh reality. Naruto had become chilly and aloof, no longer the innocent, happy youngster who showed his affections. He had become aware of the actual character of those around him as a result of the conflict. He had personally witnessed how even those he had once considered friends had taken advantage of his generosity and tenacity. His heart was hardened by the painful reality. He now operated as a top-tier Anbu agent, his life veiled in mystery. Naruto's change was remarkable. His once pale skin had become as smooth and perfect as if it had been carved out of ice by the sun. His bright orange attire gave way to streamlined, well-tailored apparel that radiated strength and sophistication. Now, the youngster who had yearned for recognition had more of it than he could possibly desire. As the hero of the war, he was revered by the populace as a representation of fortitude and optimism. Women flocked to him in an attempt to get his attention, but Naruto brushed them all off without hesitation. Sakura Haruno stood next to Sasuke Uchiha in the busy streets of Konoha, her heart heaving with grief. Her dream, a love that had never really been hers, had been pursued for years. As she watched Naruto pass them, Sasuke, who has always maintained his composure, gave her a quick glance. His icy blue eyes ignored everyone, including them, and his presence was captivating. Sakura whispered, "He's changed," in a sorrowful tone. "I can't even bring myself to say a single word to him anymore." As Sasuke took in the situation, his jaw tensed. Naruto was mobbed by a group of laughing girls who were clamoring for his autograph. The way they gazed at him, the admiration in their eyes, made Sasuke feel something he had never felt before. Envy. With a global fanbase that surpassed even Sasuke's during their academy days, Naruto had become a legend. Sasuke remarked, "He'll come around someday," in a tone that lacked conviction. Sakura's green eyes gleamed as she shook her head. "I don't think so. He sees us as traitors now. I don't know what went wrong with our team, but it feels like we were cursed." Sasuke folded his arms and stared at Naruto's vanishing form. "I just hope he doesn't turn into something none of us can control." Sakura let out a long sigh. "I hope so too." Warm sunlight poured into the Yamanaka flower shop in Konoha. With practiced ease, the most attractive woman in the community, Ino Yamanaka, put together a colorful bouquet. Her turquoise eyes gleamed, yet under the surface was a profound grief, and her long, golden hair fell down her back. Knowing that they were interested in her looks rather than her heart, she had turned down every suitor that approached her. Her thoughts frequently strayed to the ones she had lost during the conflict. She had become aloof. Every day seemed to shrink her universe. She was putting the final flower in the arrangement when she heard a disturbance outside. She looked out the window and saw him, the most eligible bachelor in the hamlet, the man who had driven everyone from his life. Standing there, commanding attention with ease, Naruto Uzumaki signed autographs for a gathering of devoted fans. His startling presence caused Ino's cheeks to flush a deep shade of red. She gasped at the ease with which he handled himself, his piercing eyes, and his keen jawline. Ino frowned, her feelings a tumultuous whirl of awe and annoyance. Her cheeks was getting hotter by the moment as she mumbled under her breath, "What does he think he is, some kind of god?" She was irritated, yet she was unable to turn away. As she watched the women swoon over him, her pulse raced and she felt a twinge of jealousy. Her mind racing, she bit her lip. "What belongs to me cannot be touched by anyone." She shook her head rapidly as the revelation hit her like a ton of bricks. She exclaimed, "What am I even thinking?" In a barely audible whisper. She balled her fists in an attempt to shake off the evil ideas that were creeping into her head. "Get a grip, Ino." "So damn attractive," she whispered as Naruto turned to go, his presence still roiling in her chest like a tempest. Her voice was equal parts longing and admiration. Her legs felt weak as she leaned against the counter. "What's the matter with me?" she pondered, her eyes tracking him until he was out of sight. The Yamanaka flower shop was illuminated by the serene radiance of the afternoon sun. Silently, Ino Yamanaka arranged a fresh flower with her delicate hands. The vivid hues of the flowers ought to have cheered her up, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Since the war, she had been here a lot, finding comfort in the flowers. The store emphasized the isolation that now characterized her existence while also serving as a reminder of her family's heritage. The shop's bell rang sharply, interrupting her quiet routine. A masked Anbu agent was standing at the entryway when she looked up. He was a powerful and unnerving presence. "Ino Yamanaka," he answered abruptly, without emotion in his voice. "You're needed for a mission. Report to Lady Tsunade immediately." Ino let out a deep sigh. She murmured to herself, "Another boring mission," as she put the bouquet down. With each step, Her mood grew darker as she followed the operative out, wiping her hands on her apron. There was tension in the air when Ino walked into Tsunade's office. Tsunade sat behind her desk, staring at the blonde kunoichi with a keen eye. Ino smiled courteously. Her tone was slightly impatient as she said, "Good afternoon, Tsunade-sama. What's the mission this time?" Silencing her, Tsunade held up a hand. "Wait. You're not going alone. Your partner will be here shortly." Ino scowled. "A partner? Who?" The door creaked open before she could say another word. As Naruto Uzumaki entered the room, it seemed to get colder. The warmth that had formerly characterized him was gone, yet his presence was still as powerful as ever. His eyes were emotionless, and his face was stern. He moved to stand next to her without giving Ino a sidelong glance. Ino's heart fell. Why him of all people? Naruto remained silent, his quiet more stifling than his words. Ino became irritated. She glared at Tsunade and shouted out, "Why him? He's the last person I want to be partnered with." When Naruto finally spoke, his tone was as icy as ice. His statement, "As if I want to be paired with a weak, useless girl like you," pierced the atmosphere like a dagger. "You're nothing but a pathetic excuse for a kunoichi." Ino's cheeks flushed with a mixture of humiliation and rage, and her eyes widened in surprise. She yelled, "Excuse me," with a raised voice. "Who do you think you are? You were the class clown, the village idiot, and now you think you're better than everyone else." Naruto's demeanor was unwavering as he fixed his focus on her. His subsequent remarks were tinged with a poisonous serenity. "That was then. Look at me now. I'm the hero of the war, the man who defeated Pain, Madara, and the legends of the battlefield. I'm the most desired person in the world, a symbol of power and greatness. The Anbu commander, a position that only someone of unparalleled skill and importance can hold." His voice fell to a threatening whisper as he stepped closer. "And you? You're nothing. No past, no future, no significance. Just a spoiled, self-absorbed girl clinging to the scraps of relevance. You're dust, Ino." Ino's throat grew constricted. Each of his remarks struck more deeply than the one before it, like daggers. Trying not to cry, she clenched her hands. He wouldn't get the satisfaction from her. However, the pain of his icy rejection was nearly intolerable. After silently observing the exchange, Tsunade finally stepped in. Sternly, "Enough, both of you," she said. "Focus. This mission is not a joke." A map was pushed on her desk. "Your targets are a group of highly dangerous bandits. They've been ambushing and murdering merchants traveling through the Fire Country. These aren't ordinary criminals. They're ruthless, skilled, and won't hesitate to kill. That's why I'm sending the two of you." Ino's hands were a little unsteady as she picked up the map. She said, "Understood," in a softer than normal tone. Naruto remained silent. Without saying another word, he turned and left the office. His deafening quiet served as a reminder of the great distance that now separated him from those he had formerly thought of as friends. For a minute, Ino stood motionless, her heart heavy and her pride wounded. She compelled herself to inhale deeply. "Avoid letting him affect you," she reminded herself. "He is merely a ruthless, resentful idiot." But despite her best efforts to ignore his remarks, they persisted like an unavoidable shadow. Tsunade looked at her and nodded sympathetically. "You've got your orders. Be careful out there." With a nod, Ino turned to go. Her thoughts were racing as she moved down the corridor. How Naruto had changed so drastically was beyond her comprehension. The once warm and hopeful child now appeared to be overtaken by gloom. Naruto stood waiting outside the Hokage's tower, his face unreadable. Ino walked warily toward him, her customary self-assurance shattered. She tried to appear uninterested as she inquired, "You ready?" Naruto remained silent. He just walked away, leaving her to trail behind him. Ino frowned and muttered to herself, "What an insufferable jerk." She was confident, but she couldn't get rid of the uneasiness that had taken root in her chest. She was more afraid of Naruto's coldness than she wanted to acknowledge because it was a transformation rather than merely an act. Ino made a commitment to prove herself to herself as much as to him as they headed toward their goal. But in her heart, she couldn't ignore the pain his words had caused. Except for the odd crunch of footsteps on the forest floor and the rustle of leaves, the dense forest was quiet. With their goal in motion, Naruto and Ino sped through the brush. You could feel the tension between them. Naruto's cold attitude had not softened, and Ino was becoming increasingly annoyed by his unyielding silence. Hours had passed during their journey with no communication. Naruto kept up a chilly, stern facade, staring straight ahead as if Ino didn't exist. Once acceptable, his quiet now felt oppressive. As the silence gnawed at her nerves, Ino clenched her hands. Her tolerance was wearing thin. At last, she was at her breaking point. "That's it," she yelled, coming to a halt. "I'm tired of this silence. Since you clearly won't speak, I'm taking charge. I'll be the leader of this mission." Naruto stopped suddenly and looked at her. The universe appeared to hold its breath for a second as his icy blue eyes met hers. "Who told you," he said in a low, menacing voice, "that a weakling like you has the right to lead this mission?" The raw anger in his tone made Ino's pulse skip a beat. Naruto stepped forward, his voice like ice, before she could respond. He uttered the words, "You're nothing but a spoiled brat playing at being a kunoichi, with a sharp edge. Leadership isn't a game for genin who think they're special because they've memorized a few jutsu. You don't have the skills or the mindset to lead anyone, let alone me." Anger made Ino's cheeks flush. "Excuse me? I'm not some inexperienced child. I've been on plenty of missions, and I've seen my share of combat." Naruto sneered. "Your experience is laughable at best. Don't kid yourself, Ino. Just because you survived the war doesn't mean you're qualified for anything. Being a war hero, being me, puts me leagues above you." Refusing to back down, Ino stepped forward as her jaw stiffened. "You think being the hero of the war makes you untouchable? That title doesn't give you the right to dismiss everyone else's value. You're not better than me, Naruto. You're not better than anyone." Naruto's eyes grew icier. "You're wrong. I am better. Better than you, better than your entire clan, and better than anyone in this village. The Yamanaka? A clan of flower arrangers pretending to be ninja. Pathetic." Ino's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She was briefly stunned by his ruthless rejection of her entire tribe. Her anger and the pain of his words caused her body to shake. Naruto's face stayed expressionless. He pivoted on his heel and started to leave, saying, "Face it, Ino. You're out of your depth. But by all means, prove me wrong. You want to be the leader. Fine. Good luck, Captain. Let's see what you can do without me." With barely controlled rage, Ino's hands trembled as she stared after him. She said, "You're just going to leave? What kind of shinobi are you?" Naruto continued. He didn't even turn around. His voice trailed off as he vanished into the jungle. "The kind who doesn't waste time babysitting failures," he continued. For an extended period, Ino stood with her hands clenched hard at her sides. She was astounded by his conceit and his complete contempt for her and all that she stood for. "He thinks he's so much better than everyone," she said to herself in a trembling voice. "I'll show him. I don't need him to complete this mission." Tsunade handed them a chart, and Ino, determined, pushed forward on her own. Hours went by, and as the sun sank below the horizon, the woodland became darker. Ino ignored her discomfort as she concentrated on the work at hand, despite the eerie solitude of the woods. She eventually arrived to a clearing where she could make out the faint sounds of humans. Her keen eyes scanned the area as she knelt low. The air was filled with the coarse laughter of a group of men sitting around a campfire up ahead. Ino could see their leader from where she was hiding. He was a tall, strong man with a scar down the side of his face. He was a powerful figure, and he exuded confidence and brutality in every motion. "Well, boys," he remarked in a deep, rumbling voice, "how many did we take down today?" A bandit smiled and held up a sack smeared with blood. 11, boss. And we got plenty of loot to go with it." The commander roared with laughter. His smile widened as he leaned back and said, "Excellent. We're making a killing. Literally. The merchants in this country are nothing but walking gold mines. Too bad they're so easy to kill." As Ino listened, her blood boiled. Her hands tightened on the kunai by her side as she clenched her teeth. Monsters, she wondered. This will not go unpunished. A shiver went down her spine as she was ready to move in. Behind her, she sensed a dark, threatening energy. Her body shivered when a deep voice spoke before she could respond. Well. What do we have here?" When Ino saw him, her heart fell, but she wheeled around with her kunai lifted. A few steps distant, the bandit leader's massive body prevented her from fleeing. His predatory eyes had been on her while he walked in silence. "A little kunoichi from Konoha," he continued, his face lighting up with a perverted smile. In a way that made her skin crawl, his eyes wandered over her. "And what a pretty one at that. You've got quite the body, don't you?" He stepped forward and licked his lips. "We're going to have some fun tonight." Ino gripped her kunai more tightly. She warned, "Don't you dare come any closer," her voice calm even as the panic began to seep into her chest. The leader gave a gloomy laugh. "Feisty. I like that." Ino's thoughts were racing. She was up against a strong foe, outnumbered, and alone. But she was not going to give up. She inhaled deeply and got ready to battle with all her might. I'll let you know who you're interacting with. Aside from the occasional crack of a twig beneath foot and the rustle of foliage, the area was strangely quiet. Ino stood in the center of the bandits, struggling to keep her breathing steady as her chest rose and fell. She glanced at the men around her, their eyes focused on her every action, their grins lecherous. She snarled, "Stay back, you disgusting pigs," and gripped the kunai more tightly. With a laugh, one of the bandits kept his eyes on her body. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Scared?" Another person added, "Feisty one," as his gaze wandered over her contours. "I like it when they fight back." Their commander moved forward, shadowing Ino with his massive frame. His scarred face was twisted into a ruthless sneer, and he was a mountain of a man. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But you're out of your league, little girl." Ino tightened her jaw. "We'll see about that." She hurled herself at the closest bandit without saying another word. Her blade found its mark in the man's shoulder as she struck, her kunai flashing in the moonlight. As blood dripped from the cut, he staggered backward and let out a cry of pain. "Bitch," he spit out, gripping his shoulder tightly. Ino continued. She turned and kicked quickly at the knee of another bandit. He grunted and fell, but the leader's voice echoed over the clearing before she could strike again. "Enough." The leader was upon Ino before she could even respond. For a man his size, he moved surprisingly quickly, his fist making contact with her stomach. Her kunai slipped from her fingers as the blow's impact pushed her crashing to the ground. Her vision swam as she strained for breath. She mumbled, I'm not done yet," and pushed herself to stand. The commander let out a deep, guttural laugh that made her shiver. "Oh, you've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're no match for me." Ino's palms formed a familiar seal as she squinted her gaze. "Think again, you bastard." She used her signature jutsu with a burst of chakra, mind-body switch technique. Aiming for the leader's mind, her spirit bounded forward. Confident that she had him, she grinned as she felt the jutsu connect. However, her triumph was fleeting. She could hear the leader laughing. "Nice try, girl, but your little tricks won't work on me." Ino's eyes became wide with surprise. The connection was broken before she could respond, and she was flung back into her own body. She staggered, collapsing at the knees as she fought to remain upright. The leader grinned more broadly. "You've got some nerve, trying that on me, but playtime's over." He was on her once more in a flash. Her head was yanked back as his enormous palm seized a handful of her hair. Ino's hands clawed at his hold as she let out a painful cry. She yelled, "Let go of me," and sent forth a violent kick. With his free hand clutching her chin, the leader sneered. He whispered, "Such a pretty face," in a mocking tone. "Shame it's wasted on a weakling like you." The other bandits drew closer, grabbing her with their hands. With her heart thumping in her chest, Ino flailed against their hold. "Get your filthy hands off me, you animals." They laughed at her entreaties. Her jacket was torn apart by one of the bandits, exposing the thin material of her tank top underneath. With his fingers grazing her flesh, another pulled at her waistband. Ino yelled, "No," with tears in her eyes. "Stop it." With his breath hot against her ear, the leader leaned closer. "Oh, we're just getting started, sweetheart." His fingers curled over the fabric as he sought for her tank top's strap. As the strap came loose from Ino's shoulder, her breath caught. Her body shook as she forced her eyes tight. Is this it? Does it end like this? The jungle then burst into anarchy? The bandits' mirth changed to shouts as a blur of movement surged across the clearing. Their bodies crumpled to the ground like discarded ragdolls as Ino's eyes shot open and she saw them fall one by one. The leader let her go as he turned to face the darkness. He snarled, "What the hell is going on?" Someone stepped out of the shadows. Even the leader recoiled from the intensity of the fire in his icy blue eyes and golden hair that glinted in the moonlight. "Naruto," Ino said, her voice shaking so much. The boss scoffed. "You've got some nerve, kid. Think you can take us all on?" Naruto remained silent. His face was emotionless and icy, as though the situation in front of him were merely a bother. "Get him!" yelled the leader. With their firearms out, the remaining bandits charged. However, Naruto moved like a shadow as his blade flashed deadly accuracy. They were all down in a matter of seconds, their corpses scattered around the clearing. The leader's confidence wavered. His eyes darted around in despair as he clenched his weapon. "You think you're tough, huh? Oh." In a second, Naruto was on him. He brought his blade down in one smooth move. As he fell, The light dwindling from his eyes, the leader's words died in his throat. There was silence again in the clearing. Standing over the corpses, Naruto's face was unreadable. His gaze shifted to Ino, who remained on the ground, her body quivering. Tears were running down her cheeks, and her eyes were wide with amazement. Her legs were wobbly, but she was able to bring herself to her feet. "Naruto," she muttered once more. He took off his cloak and put it over her shoulders without saying a word. The cool night air stood in sharp contrast to the warmth of the fabric. Still trembling, Ino gripped the cloak tightly. I thought I was going to," she sobbed as her voice broke. Naruto kept his mouth shut and stared at her. Ino hurled herself into his arms, clutching to him as though he were her lifeline, unable to contain herself. She called out, "Thank you," her voice hushed against his chest. "Thank you for saving me." After a little pause, Naruto slowly encircled her with his arms. His memory replayed Kurama's voice. "Soothe her, child, she requires it." For the first time in years, Naruto's voice was gentle as he tightened his grasp. "It's okay," he quietly said. "You're safe now." Ino's tear-streaked face broke into a tiny, appreciative smile as she glanced up at him. The boy she used to know briefly took the place of the aloof, icy Naruto. He took her in his arms and carried her bridal style through the woodland without saying another word. With her heart finally starting to slow, Ino put her head against his chest. She felt safe for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. The constant sound of the rain beating on the tents made the night unbearable. Thunder roared loudly, followed by lightning that lit up the black woodland. As each lightning strike threw a burst of light through the little entrance of her tent, Ino lay there, holding on to her blanket. She was shaking uncontrollably. The storm wasn't the only thing. The nightmare was it. The bandit commander had been in her dreams, with his ruthless smile, his hands ripping at her clothing, and her sense of powerlessness as she cried out for assistance. No one showed up in her dream. Naruto did not show up. Her chest heaved as she struggled to settle her breathing as she startled up with a piercing cry. She told herself it was just a dream, but the terror persisted. Suppressing the sobs that tried to spill forth, she embraced her knees. The rain pelted the tent in waves as the storm persisted. Ino nibbled on her lip. Storms were something she detested. As a child, she would seek solace in her parents' warmth and safety by crawling into bed with them whenever there was thunder and lightning. They were gone now, though, and she was by herself. She mumbled, "I can't do this," as she ran a hand through her hair. Her gaze strayed to her tent's door. A thought came to her, one that caused her cheeks to blush. Why not? Ino sneaked out of her tent and grabbed a little umbrella to protect herself from the rain. She walked to the next tent, her legs drenched from the chilly rain that pummeled down around her. She hesitated, pausing at the door. Her heart was pounding from what she was going to do as well as the storm. She inhaled deeply before ducking inside. The pale glimmer of a lamp illuminated the interior of Naruto's tent. As soon as her eyes adapted to the dim illumination, her face became hot. The blanket barely covered Naruto's lower half as he slept on his side, his chest exposed. Under the mild light, his skin glistened slightly from the dampness, and his slender, well-defined muscles showed out. His normally icy look had changed to one of tranquility as he slept, his features relaxed. A beat skipped through Ino's heart. Although she had always thought Naruto was attractive, she felt sick to her stomach when she saw him in this state, so calm and defenseless. She knelt next to him and gave him a gentle shoulder shake, whispering, "Naruto-kun," she said. His eyes opened slowly as he stirred. "Ino?" he asked in a dazed, bewildered voice. "What are you doing here?" Abruptly self-conscious of her appearance, she looked away. She was dressed in a sheer nightgown that hugged her curves and didn't leave much room for interpretation. She tightened the cloak she had previously borrowed, although it did little to conceal her shape. She said, I can't sleep," in a scarcely audible voice. "The storm, it scares me, and I had a nightmare." Naruto's face softened a little as he blinked. A nightmare? Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. She turned aside in embarrassment as she said, "I dreamed earlier. About those bandits. I kept screaming, but no one came to save me. I know it's stupid, but I'm scared." Naruto sat up and looked into her eyes. Silently, "It's not stupid," he said. Ino inhaled nervously. Can I sleep here? Just for tonight?" There was silence for a while. Naruto then gave a nod. "Yeah, sure." She felt a wave of relief and threw her arms around him before she could stop herself. She said, "Thank you," in a whisper. Evidently unaccustomed to such demonstrations of affection, Naruto tensed at the contact but did not recoil. Rather, he gave her a clumsy back pat. Ino's face was inches from his as she withdrew a little. Her gaze shifted from his face to his chest and back again. Her cheeks were flaming as she continued, "I'll just lie down here." She took a seat next to him and laid her head on his chest. She could feel the steady cadence of his heartbeat beneath her ear, and his warmth was reassuring. She encircled him with her arms, keeping him close. Shifting slightly, Naruto tried to ignore her body pressing against his, her lovely contours hard to miss. The sensation of her skin on his was hardly concealed by her nightgown. She whispered, "Good night, Naruto-kun," in a voice that was both tired and satisfied. He said, "Good night," in a softer tone than usual. Ino's breathing evened out as she fell asleep, and she clung to him. With his thoughts racing, Naruto lay motionless. He had never experienced such intimacy before. Kurama laughed in his head. "Naruto, I had no idea you were such a softie." "Shut up," Naruto whispered to himself. "She's holding on to you tightly, you should look after her." With a sigh, Naruto ran his palm over Ino's hair. "I know," he said in a whisper. Tsunade sat behind her desk in the Hokage's office, away from the storm, holding a bottle of sake. Kakashi was standing close by, his mask covering his face as usual. Tsunade added, "Things have changed," in a somber voice. "Naruto's change." Kakashi gave nod. "He's been through a lot. The war, Obito, it left scars. He's pushed everyone away." Tsunade scowled. "Even Ino?" Kakashi laughed. "You sent them on a mission together? Brave move." "They don't get along," declared Tsunade, "but maybe this will help them understand each other." Kakashi let out a sigh. "I just hope Naruto doesn't lose himself. He's been walking a dark path ever since the war ended." Pouring herself another glass, Tsunade did so. "He won't. Naruto's stronger than that. I believe in him." Beneath his mask, Kakashi gave a little smile. "So do I, but sometimes, fate has a way of surprising us." Tsunade lifted her mug. "Let's hope it surprises us in a good way." Kakashi looked away as he nodded, "For all our sakes." For the first time in weeks, Ino slept well in the tent while the storm continued to rage. Naruto stayed up, his mind racing with feelings and memories. He didn't feel totally alone for the first time in a long time. Slowly, Naruto's senses began to awaken in the tent's low light. The small discomfort of something heavy holding him down was immediately felt, as was the warmth pushed against him. He looked down, blinking the sleep from his eyes. His naked chest was tickled by Ino's gentle, rhythmic breathing as she lay stretched out over him. Her arms were wrapped about him as if he might vanish if she released them, and one of her legs was placed languidly over his. Naruto let out a sigh. He tried to move, but Ino stirred at the first sign of movement. With a pinched brow, she muttered blearily, "Don't move, I don't want to wake up yet." He sighed again, more resignedly, and froze, muttering to himself, "TCH, this is ridiculous." With her cheek pressed firmly against his chest, Ino sank even further into him. Naruto became uncomfortably aware of her body, particularly the way her large chest crushed against him, and his eyes widened. The warmth and softness of her nightgown against his flesh was unaffected by its thin fabric. His mind echoed with the loud, rumbling laughter of Kurama. "Look at you, powerful battle hero Naruto Uzumaki. Reduced to a body pillow for girls." Naruto grimaced inwardly. He muttered, "Shut it, you stupid furball," being cautious not to wake Ino. Kurama gave a snort. "You should be the village's great protector, but here you are, pinned down by a female. The fall of the powerful." Anger contorted Naruto's face. "Oh, please. You're one to talk. You're just a lazy fox who spends all his time sleeping or mocking me. What have you done lately?" "Oh, that's right, nothing." Kurama snarled. "You arrogant brat, watch what you say. The strongest of the tailed beasts is me, the nine-tailed fox. I could level mountains with my power." Naruto interrupted, rolling his eyes. "Blah, blah, blah," he said. "You're nothing but a talking puffball who gets cranky when I don't let you nap." In Naruto's thoughts, Kurama's voice boomed as he snapped. "How dare you, I am a monster of unmatched grandeur and strength. Be respectful, or I'll cry about it," joked Naruto. "Face it, Kurama. Without me, you'd still be stuck in some dank cave, probably napping under a rock. You owe me, furball." The fox snarled, obviously angry, but Naruto felt a damp touch against his chest before he could respond. He blinked and brought his attention back to the here and now, forgetting his jokes with Kurama. He noticed the moisture smearing across his skin and whispered, "Ino?" She was in tears. Her body shook a little as silent tears fell down her cheeks. Her fingers gripped the material of his trousers, and her lips trembled as she held on to him even more. With a hint of worry in his voice, Naruto said, "Ino, what's wrong?" In between sobbing, she sniffed and spoke. The pain in her voice pierced the air as she said, "You were right, Naruto, I'm weak and pathetic." She shuddered and couldn't finish the sentence, saying, "I'm nothing but a spoiled girl who's always relied on others. I nearly lost everything yesterday because of my weakness. If you hadn't been there, Pai." Naruto listened without saying anything, his gaze narrowing a little. "I could have been." Ino buried her face in his chest, choking on the words. "They almost took everything from me. My pride, my dignity, my virginity. If you hadn't come," she sobbed, her shoulders trembling dramatically. Naruto's heart clenched and his jaw constricted. Even though he wasn't the best at handling emotional situations, he couldn't deny the suffering she was going through. He put his arms around her tentatively and slowly, drawing her in. With an almost discernible voice, Ino went on. "I've always had everything handed to me. The Yamanaka clan techniques, my lifestyle, I didn't have to struggle like you did. You were an orphan, hated by the village. You had nothing, but you worked hard and became the strongest shinobi. And me? I'm nothing. You were right about everything." Naruto scowled as he tightened his hold on her. He murmured softly, "Ino," in a steady yet kind voice. He stopped, trying to find the proper words, then said, "You're not weak. Yeah, you've had it easier than some, but that doesn't mean you're worthless. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, no matter how hard you've been hit. You've got potential, but you need to push yourself to find it." Ino's red, tear-streaked eyes looked up at him as she sniffed. She muttered, "But what if I can't?" "You can," Naruto firmly stated. "You're strong, Ino. You just need to believe it." He paused before saying, "And, you're not just strong. You're talented, smart, and beautiful, too." Ino looked at him in astonishment, her cheeks heated, her tears temporarily forgotten. "Beautiful?" Naruto looked aside awkwardly and touched the back of his neck. "Yeah. You're not bad to look at," he said. Ino's lips quirked, a small smile piercing her grief. "You're terrible at giving compliments, you know that." Naruto gave a shrug. "I'm not exactly a smooth talker." Her laughter blended with the sound of the rain as she laughed quietly. She lifted herself up slowly and sat on his lap. With her hips resting against him and her nightgown riding up a little, Naruto's cheeks flushed pink. He started to say, "Ino," but she put a finger to his lips to silence him. She said, "You've been there for me when no one else was," in a quiet but determined tone. "Thank you, Naruto-kun." She lowered down and kissed him before he could react. As she put her thanks and feelings into the gesture, the kiss swiftly deepened from its initial cautious probing. After widening in surprise, Naruto's eyes gradually closed. After a moment of uncertainty, his hands settled on her waist, his fingers grazing the silky material of her nightgown. They were both out of breath when they eventually separated. With a smile, Ino's eyes gleamed with a mixture of fondness and mischief. "You really are something else, Naruto-kun." Despite his hot face, Naruto forced a tiny smile. "You're not so bad yourself, Ino." She leaned her face against his and chuckled quietly. While the storm continued to roar outside, a strange sense of tranquility had settled between them within the tent. They both felt a little less alone for the first time in a long time. The forest floor was covered in dappled patterns as morning light poured through the trees. The air was still fresh but laden with moisture after the storm had passed. As they prepared to return to the village, Naruto waited outside the tent, adjusting his equipment. Even though the weight of the recent events was weighing heavily on his mind, his countenance remained neutral. Ino busied herself behind him, placing her things neatly into her trip bag. Despite her deliberate actions, her gaze kept straying to Naruto. The morning sun accentuated his wiry, slender figure as he stood facing away from her. His delicate features gave him an ethereal charm that was difficult to overlook, and his complexion was pale, almost glowing. Ino's mind drifted, and she felt her cheeks flush. "He resembles a porcelain doll, almost too flawless. However, I am more knowledgeable." Unmatched strength is hidden beneath his calm facade. She gripped her bag's strap more tightly. Her resolve stiffening, she thought, "I've made my decision, Naruto. I own you. My everything, my love, and my guardian. Nobody else will get in our way, not even Sakura or Hinata. I'll annihilate them if they try." She inhaled deeply and walked over to him. She called softly, "Naruto-kun," with a hint of anxious expectation in her voice. His eyes were steady and serene as he turned. What is it? Ino's heart skipped a beat. She took a deep breath and glanced down for a moment before looking him in the eye. I was thinking, she said, a little stuttering in her voice. Naruto's eyebrow went up. About what? Ino's face became red. She gathered her confidence and tightened her hands, saying, I need. She cried out, I want you. Startled, Naruto blinked. What? With her face flaming, Ino waved her hands wildly as she realized how her words sounded. She swiftly clarified, I want you to train me. Please. Naruto-kun, I need your help. With an inquisitive face, Naruto cocked his head. Why me? With sincere eyes, Ino inhaled deeply. Because I'm weak, Naruto, and I hate it. I need to get stronger, and I can't do it alone. You're the only one I trust, the only one who sees more than just my body. Her voice became more muffled. Every other guy just wants me for how I look, but you're different. You see me for who I am. That's why I want you to train me, please. Naruto gazed at her for a while, considering what she had said. She was desperate to change and grow, and he could see it in her eyes. He paused, then nodded. All right, he finally said. I'll train you, but I won't go easy on you. Ino's expression brightened. She threw her arms around Naruto-kun. Yes, thank you, Naruto-kun, she cried. Oi, let go, held Naruto's arms at his sides in protest. Nope. Ino chuckled while embracing him more tightly. With a delighted spin, she let go of him and ran through the trees, her laughter echoing through the woods. Naruto-kun is going to train me. This is the best day ever. A rare little smile tugged at the corners of Naruto's mouth as he watched her. Her enthusiasm was contagious and brought back memories of a time when he had been equally upbeat and vibrant. But as his thoughts grew gloomy, the smile vanished. Those times are over. It's impossible to turn back. His thoughts were cut short as Ino reappeared, her expression abruptly changing. Her once jolly eyes had taken on a darker, more possessive sheen. Her voice fell to a low, almost ominous tone as she took a step closer. Although she spoke with a hint of bitterness, she said, by the way, Naruto-kun, with sweetness. Her smile sharpened as she drifted off. You know, if you ever train another girl besides me, I'll kill you. Naruto blinked with surprise. What? Ino's tone remained surprisingly upbeat as her smile grew. I mean it. You're mine, Naruto. Only mine. If anyone else tries to get between us, they'll regret it. From now on, I'm the only girl you need in your life. As he gazed at her, Naruto's forehead began to perspire. That's a bit extreme, don't you think? With an unwavering smile, Ino shrugged. She took his arm and pressed it to her chest, saying, I don't care. The softness of her body made Naruto's face flush, and he attempted to break free, but her hold was surprisingly firm. Ino, let go, he said in a tight voice. Nope, she leaned against him and whispered in jest. This feels nice. Naruto let out an inner groan. She seems like a totally different individual. This must be the manifestation of Yamanaka's insanity. Meanwhile, Kurama was giggling uncontrollably. At last, it's unbelievable that a lady totally beat up the legendary shinobi, Naruto Uzumaki. This is invaluable. Shut up, Kurama, Naruto ejected himself. Kurama laughed and said, Oh, I'm never letting you live this down. You are aware that she has you completely enamored. With a sigh, Naruto accepted his fate. Whatever, he kept his voice low. Let's just get going. With a sincere smile once more, Ino held onto his arm. Lead the way, Naruto-kun. Naruto couldn't help but feel both amused and frustrated as they strolled through the woodland. Even though Ino was erratic, fierce, and sometimes insane, her resolve was undeniable. And he sensed a glimmer of hope in spite of himself. Perhaps, just possibly, he wasn't as isolated as he believed. As Naruto and Ino passed through the village gates together, Naruto's normally composed and aloof manner only slightly faltered under Ino Yamanaka's constant scrutiny. Her arm was securely joined to his, her fingers gripping his arm near her chest, and she smiled contentedly, as though she didn't give a damn. As the villagers turned to gaze, Naruto's eyes darted around, looking conflicted between shame and frustration. Sakura and Sasuke were strolling along when he abruptly stopped, his eyes narrowing as he saw Naruto and Ino coming. His eyes became wide with shock. Sakura noticed the change in his countenance and said, Sasuke? Her head turned in the same direction, and when she saw the strange spectacle playing out in front of them, her mouth fell open. No way, this can't be real. Around them, other villagers also started to take note. Driven by astonishment and incredulity, Whispers began to circulate across the streets. Kiba, who was standing close to Shino, blinked before laughing loudly, half delighted, partly incredulous. This is it. The end of the world. Someone save the children. Without altering his normally stern look, Shino raised an eyebrow. He murmured, "You're exaggerating, Kiba," and adjusted his glasses. Kiba, however, gave a dramatic shake of his head. "No, this is like a shinobi giving up on their skill set. It's like a member of the Inuzuka clan abandoning their ninken for a cat." Shino looked at him. "I'm right here." Hinata, who had also been strolling close by, noticed Ino shamelessly clinging to Naruto. She felt a twinge of sadness and turned her head away. Ino snuggled closer to Naruto and rested her head on his shoulder as she glanced at the throng, her smile widening. "They're so happy for us, Naruto-kun. Isn't it cute?" she added, glaring at Sakura as they passed. Sakura just gazed, a look of surprise and bewilderment on her face. Naruto and Ino, the two people who couldn't stand each other. With a sigh, Naruto pulled his arm a little. Ino, can you let go now?" Ino only smirked playfully at him. "Nope," she said pleasantly, tightening her grip on his arm as they went. Sakura kept staring, taking in the bizarre change of events, while Sasuke narrowed his eyes and studied the situation. In an attempt to avoid more attention, Naruto kept his head down, but Ino's antics prevented him from doing so. "Kurama, I swear this is so embarrassing," he thought. Kurama laughed inside. "Ah, a girl humbles the powerful Naruto Uzumaki. This is invaluable." "Stop talking, furball," Naruto complained, his cheeks turning a little red. Naruto felt a glimmer of relief as they got closer to the Hokage's office, hoping that this public display would finally come to a stop. Ino, however, had different plans. Shizune and Tsunade were deep in conversation when they walked into the office. Shizune's mouth dropped open as she stared at them as her eyes first met theirs. When Tsunade turned to look at her assistant's response, her own jaw dropped. What in the world? Seemingly unaware of everyone's surprise, Ino smiled. She remarked gently, "We're here to submit our mission report," while continuing to hold Naruto's arm. Tsunade tried to take in what she was seeing as she narrowed her gaze at them. "Ino, Naruto, what exactly is going on here?" Ino glanced back at Tsunade after looking up at Naruto. She exclaimed with a big smile, "Oh, didn't we mention? Naruto-kun and I are together now, he's my boyfriend." Naruto shook his head rapidly as his face reddened deeply. "I didn't say that." "Isn't it wonderful? Soon enough, he's going to propose, and we'll get married and have lots of cute kids," Ino said, ignoring him. Shizune looked at her with amazement. "So that's how it is." When Naruto attempted to free his arm once more, Ino resisted and gave him a little slap on the arm as though he were being ridiculous. She cooed, "Oh, Naruto-kun, you don't have to be shy. Everyone's already happy for us, right?" As Tsunade watched the two of them, her expression softened a little. She whispered to herself, "Perhaps she'll help him see things differently," with a little grin on her lips. Every great man has a woman by his side. Ino pulled Naruto to the door before he could reply. The Hokage and her aide watched in confused silence as she led Naruto-kun out, chirping, "Well, we have places to be, right, Naruto-kun?" When they were back on the village streets, Ino smiled broadly and finally relaxed. She put a hand on her heart and said, "Naruto-kun, I'll miss you," in a theatrical manner. A little surprised, Naruto blinked at her. "You'll miss me?" Ino nodded and groaned. With a tiny pout on her lips, she looked down and said, "I wanted to keep training with you all day, but I know you need rest." Naruto tried to hide his bewilderment by shrugging. Yeah, training tomorrow sounds good." Ino shot him a quick, inspired glance. "Oh, I almost forgot something." She swiftly leaned in and planted a strong kiss on Naruto's lips, causing him to raise an eyebrow. He was too stunned for a while to respond. With a teasing smile, Ino bit her lip and withdrew, glancing around at the villagers who had all gathered to watch with wide eyes. She said, "Now you'll have something to remember me by," in a soft, low voice. She winked and turned to leave, leaving Naruto standing there looking agitated. "Don't forget it." He tried to conceal the blush that was starting to appear on his face by pulling his collar up a little as he heard the small gasps and whispers from those around them. He looked down to see a dab of her lipstick on his shirt and thought, the Yamanaka clan is officially insane. He kept reliving the scene in his head as he walked back to his apartment, a tiny smile pulling at his lips in spite of himself. A part of him found it oddly charming, but the attention and the gestures were overwhelming. With a quiet chuckle, Tsunade shook her head back in the Hokage's office. Perhaps she's exactly what he needs. The peaceful town of Konoha was illuminated by the moon's silvery radiance as it hung high in the sky. Except for one restless soul, all was quiet. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Ino Yamanaka's mind was a frenzied tornado. As she gazed blankly at the wall, her legs swung back and forth and her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. There was only one thing on her mind: Naruto. Every time she closed her eyes, she had eerie, longing dreams about him that left her gasping for air. Night, however, was different. She was unable to sleep for even a moment. She brushed a flyaway hair behind her ear and mumbled to herself, "Why can't I stop thinking about him? Naruto-kun. My love, my fiancé, my future husband." Her eyes glowed with joy as she suddenly realized something. She clasped her hands together and smiled mischievously, saying, "Of course. Why am I torturing myself like this? I don't need to be alone. I'll move in with Naruto-kun. Yes, that's it, I'll live with him, share everything with him, and be by his side every moment." Ino leapt to his feet and started packing without thinking. Humming joyfully, she packed her luggage with her clothing, toiletries, and a few precious objects. She felt a feeling of purpose and excitement when she considered living with Naruto. As she zipped up her suitcases, she told herself, "I don't need 2 rooms in that fancy new apartment I just bought. 1 room is enough. 1 bed is enough, for both of us." As she imagined Naruto's response, she laughed to herself. With a determined expression on her face, she laughed and picked up her luggage before leaving her flat. What will his face look like when he sees me at his door in the middle of the night? Probably priceless. Naruto, meanwhile, was deep in a rare, restful sleep. His thoughts were free of the burdens of his past and present obligations for a change. He lay stretched out on his bed, his body calm, his breathing regular. But that calm didn't last long. Bang, bang, bang. His flat was filled with the sound of a loud, persistent knocking. With a moan, Naruto drew the pillow over his head and stirred. He was still partly sleeping when he said, "Who the hell is knocking at this hour?" He tried to ignore the knocking by turning over, but it simply got louder and more insistent. He rubbed his eyes and sat up, sighing. He said, all right, I'm coming," and dragged his feet in the direction of the door. He fully anticipated seeing a neighbor or, worst, an Enbu member on an urgent assignment. However, the last person he anticipated was there when he opened the door. With a startled blink, he said, "Ino, what are you doing here?" As if she owned the building, Ino pushed by him and dragged her luggage inside before he could get a response. With a contented sigh, she kicked off her sandals and collapsed on his couch. "Nice place, Naruto-kun," she exclaimed, oblivious to his confused look. "I've decided I'm moving in with you." Naruto's mouth fell open. "What, you can't just—" "Oh, but I can," Ino cut in, dismissively waving a hand. "You see, I've been having these terrible nightmares, and I can't sleep alone. So, I thought, who better to stay with than my dear, sweet fiancé?" Naruto squeezed his nose bridge. "I'm not your fiancé, Ino." "Not yet," she winked and corrected, "but you will be." Naruto could hear Kurama laughing. The fox, hardly able to control his laughter, declared, "This is gold. She won't let you rest for even a second." Naruto let out an inner groan. "Furball, stop talking," he said firmly. "Ino, you can't just move in here without asking." "But I already did," Ino remarked with a smile as she got to her feet and stretched. Her tight tank top and shorts left little room for interpretation, and Naruto hurriedly looked away, his face flushed. "And I'm not leaving." With a sigh, Naruto acknowledged that he was losing the struggle. "Fine. But you're sleeping in the other room." Loud and unrepentant, Ino's laughing echoed. "Oh, Naruto-kun, you're so funny. Of course, I'm sleeping in your room." Naruto's gaze expanded. "What? No way." She took his hand, saying, "Way," and ushered him into his bedroom. "Come on, it's been a long night, and I'm tired." Ino threw her bag into his room's corner and collapsed onto his bed before Naruto could object any further. She started removing her tank top, exposing a lacy bra that was having trouble holding her voluptuous chest in place. Naruto's face was burning as he turned hastily away. "Ino, what are you doing?" She smiled and kicked off her shorts to show off her matching underwear, saying, "Getting comfortable, duh. Don't be shy, Naruto-kun. We're going to be living together from now on. You'll have to get used to this." Naruto mumbled something beneath his breath and moaned, "This isn't possible." Meanwhile, Kurama was giggling uncontrollably. "Oh, how precious this is. The future of your reputation is bleak." Ino patted the area beside her after sliding beneath the covers. Come on, Naruto-kun. Don't keep me waiting. Despite his senses telling him to run, Naruto hesitated. However, he was familiar enough with Ino to know that once she made up her mind, she couldn't be stopped. He climbed into bed with resignation, avoiding contact as much as possible. Ino moved over and pressed herself against him as soon as he lay down. Her arms encircled him firmly, and her head lay on his chest. She whispered, "Good night, Naruto-kun," in a quiet, satisfied voice. With his heart thumping in his chest, Naruto laid as rigid as a board. He looked up at the ceiling and thought, "This is my life now." The last sound he heard before falling asleep was Kurama's voice. "You're quite a handful, youngster." Despite the stillness of the night, Naruto's thoughts were anything but. In his dream, he was standing in the middle of a barren battlefield, while his body was still in bed. The sky above was a swirling tempest of blackness, broken by flashes of unsettling purple lightning, while the ground was scorched and fractured. He was confronted by a shadow-covered figure with coal-like eyes. He exuded evil, and his weapon, a huge, ragged scythe, shone with a dark, menacing aura. The man said, "Ah, Naruto Uzumaki," in a low, derisive rumble. "The so-called hero of the Fourth Great Ninja War. How the mighty have fallen." Naruto's breathing became labored as he tightened his hands. He made an attempt to bring forth his typical strength, but no chakra responded. His reflexes were blunted, and his limbs felt leaden. In the cold, even Kurama's force appeared far away, like a smoldering ember. Naruto shouted, in a forceful but subtly fearful voice, "Who are you?" With a laugh, the figure lifted his scythe. He rushed ahead before Naruto could respond, saying, "I am your end." Naruto staggered away, almost avoiding the scythe's blade as it whistled through the air. With relentless and accurate strikes, the man pressed his attack. Naruto was forced to defend himself as he struggled to avoid the dark trails left by each scythe swing. The sword brushed his side, sending a wave of pain through his body, and his heartbeat in his chest. "You're weak," he said sarcastically, his eyes shining with a cruel joy. "Without your allies, without your precious village, you're nothing." Refusing to give in, Naruto gritted his teeth. He sprang forward, intending to strike his opponent in the face, but the man easily seized his fist and twisted his arm, knocking Naruto to the ground. "Enough games," snarled the man. The blade of his scythe glowed with dark energy as he raised it far above his head. "It's time to end this. Goodbye, Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto felt a cold, burning pain as the blade sliced through him as the scythe descended with a thunderous roar. He watched as his head rolled to the ground and his own body fell, motionless. Naruto's body violently convulsed in the actual world. His breathing was labored, and he was drenched in sweat. Ino stirred next him, sensing the bed's waves. She rubbed her eyes and blinked awake, recognizing Naruto's anguish instantly. His body was shaking uncontrollably, and his face was twisted in terror. Her voice was filled with worry as she muttered, "Naruto-kun?" She sat up, put a hand on his shoulder, and gave him a little shake when he didn't answer. "Naruto-kun, wake up." He did not, however, stir. His fists gripped the covers as his breathing became more irregular. "Hey," Ino yelled, shaking him more violently. "Naruto-kun, wake up." Naruto gasped as his eyes sprung open. He gasped in air and sat up suddenly, his chest heaving. He grabbed the cover with trembling hands and pallid skin. With her eyes wide with concern, Ino said, "Naruto-kun, what's wrong? You were shaking and sweating. It looked like you were having a nightmare." Still engrossed in the terrifying scene, Naruto's gaze flitted over the room. In an attempt to control his breathing, he ran a hand over his wet hair. "It's nothing," he replied in a rough voice. "Just a bad dream. I don't want to talk about it." Ino scowled but didn't challenge him. Instead, she put a reassuring touch on his arm and reached out. The words, "It's okay, Naruto-kun," were spoken quietly. "You're safe now." Although Naruto nodded, he was still stiff and his body continued to tremble a little. After observing him for a while, Ino appeared to make a choice. Suddenly, "Take off your shirt," she commanded. Perplexed, Naruto blinked at her. "What? Why?" "Just do it," stated Ino. "Trust me." Naruto reluctantly took off his shirt, exposing a toned chest that was slightly scarred. He shivered a little in the cool night air, and his skin was glistening with moisture. Ino reached behind her back and unclasped her bra, allowing it to drop to the ground before he could inquire what she was doing. She pushed closer and pressed herself against Naruto, her large, soft, and full chest now bare. "Ino," Naruto said, his face flushed. "What are you?" "Shish," Ino whispered, Encircling him with her arms, she gently guided his head to rest against her chest by pulling it down. This will help you relax. Just breathe, Naruto-kun. The warmth and tenderness of her flesh caused Naruto's complaints to die in his throat. Her steady heartbeat pounded in his ear, a calming sound that gradually started to slow down his rushing thoughts. He felt himself letting out a big breath as her aroma filled his nostrils, a blend of flowery perfume and something that was exclusively hers. See? Ino stroked his hair and whispered, isn't this better? With his face still red, Naruto muttered something unintelligible, but he did not retreat. His breathing steadied out and his shaking stopped. As his warm breath touched her skin, Ino grinned. Good, now, let's get some sleep. Leaning back, she held Naruto's head close to her chest. With a satisfied smile on her lips, she closed her eyes and kept running her fingers through his hair. Sweet dreams, Naruto-kun, she muttered. The village was far from calm elsewhere. Kakashi Hatake stood by his window in the Hokage's house, gazing out at the streets that were dark. His thoughts were weighty, and a deep scowl replaced his normally composed manner. The silence was broken by a knock on his door. Enter, muttered Kakashi, looking at the guest. With a somber countenance, Hayate Gecko entered. Kakashi-senpai, we've received a report. Another village has been destroyed. Kakashi's gaze grew strained. Which one? Hayate clarified, 5 villages, actually, in a tense voice. Small settlements in the outer regions. All wiped out. No survivors. Kakashi felt a sinking heart. And the culprit? We still don't know, said Hayate. Whoever it is, they leave no trace. The only clue we have is the brutality of the attacks. Everyone is killed, and, he paused. And, asked Kakashi. Hayate said the words, the women are violated before being killed, in a voice that was almost audible. It's inhuman, monstrous. With his mind whirling, Kakashi clenched his fists. This isn't just a rogue ninja. This is something far worse. Hayate gave a nod. What should we do, senpai? Kakashi's eyes hardened as he sighed. We prepare. First thing tomorrow, I'll inform Lady Tsunade. In the meantime, get some rest. We'll need our strength for what's coming. Hayate bowed and replied, yes, Kakashi-senpai, before exiting the room. Alone with his thoughts, Kakashi turned back to the window. This doesn't bode well, he said quietly behind his back. What's happening to our world? With that foreboding idea, the night continued, full of hidden threats and sinister prophecies. The room had a gentle golden glow as the sun shone through the drapes. Naruto awoke slowly from his restless sleep. As he regained consciousness, he noticed an odd feeling. Something warm and soft, no, incredibly soft, pressed against his face. It had a subtle floral scent along with a sweeter, more personal scent. Naruto's heart almost stopped as his eyes sprung open. With every breath, his face was buried in Ino's bare chest, her large bosom gently rising and sinking. The smooth curve of her body pressed against his, and he could feel the warmth of her skin. He attempted to break away in panic, but Ino's arms became tighter around his head and drew him in. Shush, she whispered in a gentle, light-hearted tone. Just sleep a little longer, Naruto-kun. You're so warm. Naruto's voice was muffled as he said, Ino, his face still pushed hard against her chest. Let me go, I need to get up. Nope, Ino said, grinning mischievously. With a playful tone, she caressed his hair and said, you're staying right here, isn't this comfy? With his voice still muffled, Naruto moaned, Ino, seriously, let me go. With a dramatic sigh, she relaxed her hold just enough to allow him to back away. Naruto's face was a deep scarlet as he sat up swiftly. With her arms languidly extended above her head, Ino stayed in a supine position. She yawned and said, Good morning, Naruto-kun, her amused eyes glimmering. Naruto gave her a fleeting glance before turning away. Morning. Ino sulked. Don't be rude, Naruto-kun. Look at me when you say it. He let out a sigh without making eye contact. Good morning, Ino. She gave a victorious smile. That's more like it. See, you can be sweet when you try. Naruto got up and covered himself with a shirt. I'm going to take a shower. And, cover yourself, will you? With one shoulder teasely bare, Ino pulled a blanket over herself and chuckled. Oh, Naruto-kun, you're so shy. After muttering something to himself, Naruto walked out of the room. Suddenly, Ino sprung out of bed and ran past him as he was walking down the corridor. Confused, Naruto called after her, Hey! She was the first to arrive at the restroom, and she gave him a tongue out. Ladies first, Naruto-kun. Be a gentleman. Naruto let out a moan. Fine, whatever. Ino leaned in and gave him a brief kiss on the lips before he could leave. She murmured pleasantly, thanks, Naruto-kun, and shut the door. For a time, Naruto stood motionless, his face flushed. He grumbled as he made his way to the living room, she's impossible. Naruto sat on the couch for several minutes, reflecting on his odd dream. He was unable to get rid of the nightmare, which continued to hover at the periphery of his consciousness. The sound of running water and Ino's voice calling out from the bathroom broke his reverie. Naruto-kun. The shower's broken. He scowled and got to his feet. What do you mean it's broken? With an irritated tone, she answered, it's not working, come fix it. Naruto let out a sigh and muttered to himself that this was absurd. He went to knock on the door of the bathroom. All right, I'm coming in. This is embarrassing, you know. He opened the door gingerly, but there was no answer. For an instant he saw nothing, then steam rolled out. Ino! He exclaimed as he entered. Abruptly, the door behind him crashed. When he turned back, he saw Ino leaning against the door with her hands on her hips and her entire body nude. With startled eyes, Naruto yelled, you tricked me. Ino gave a cheeky smile. I didn't trick you. I just wanted some help, and maybe some company. Naruto's face became red. Ino, this isn't funny. Her damp hair stuck to her skin as she took a step closer. She put her arms over Naruto-kun's shoulders and murmured, come on, Naruto-kun, in a teasing manner. We're both adults. Let's enjoy this. As she dragged him into the shower, Naruto attempted to object, but his words became stuck in his throat. His garments were immediately soaked as the water poured over them. When he tried to back away, he moaned, Ino, my clothes, but she grabbed him tightly. She ran her fingers through his hair and chuckled. You'll dry off. Relax, Naruto-kun. This will be fun. Naruto was embarrassed, but he couldn't help but give in to her. Her playfulness and confidence were amazing. Naruto was in the kitchen, getting dressed and preparing breakfast after their exciting shower. He tried to block out the recollection of Ino's lighthearted taunting and concentrated on the task at hand. Ino, meanwhile, came in wearing a form-fitting gym attire that drew attention to her body. She made a dramatic turn, flaunting her new outfit. Posing, she said, what do you think, Naruto-kun? I bought this yesterday. It's perfect for training, don't you think? Naruto gave her a quick glance before turning back to the stove. Simply, it's fine, he said. With a pout, Ino went to the table and took a seat. You're no fun, Naruto-kun. But that's okay. I'll get you to loosen up eventually. Her eyes widened in joy as she snatched up a dish of food and took a bite. She cried out, oh my god. This is amazing. Naruto-kun, you're an incredible cook. Naruto gave a shrug. It's just breakfast. With a smile, Ino took another bite. I've decided. From now on, you're making all our meals. It's your job as my future husband. Naruto gave an eye roll. Great. Just what I needed, a new job. Ino loaded up her training backpack with water bottles and other necessities after breakfast. Excited, she stretched and adjusted her headband. I'm ready, she declared. Today's the day I start my journey to becoming stronger than you, Naruto-kun. Naruto grinned. We'll see about that. She approached him, took his hand, and dragged him to the door. Come on, Naruto-kun. Let's go. Kurama's laughter reverberated in Naruto's head as they went outdoors. Great work, Naruto. You've got yourself quite the handful. Naruto let out a sigh. This is going to be a long day. Squeezing his hand, Ino grinned. Don't worry, Naruto-kun. We'll make it fun. That marked the start of their training and mischief day. As Naruto and Ino traversed the busy streets of Konoha, the sun was shining brightly. Ino was beaming with joy as she gripped Naruto's hand tightly and rested her head on his shoulder. On the other hand, Naruto kept his eyes fixed forward and maintained his typical cool, collected manner. As they went by, everyone in the village looked and muttered. They didn't see Naruto, the war's once boisterous and joyous hero, walking thus silently with the brave and attractive Ino Yamanaka holding his hand very often. Sakura Haruno was among those in attendance. Her eyes narrowed as she saw her two former comrades standing next to a store. A mixture of bewilderment and jealousy twisted her emotions. Seeing Sakura's eyes, Ino grinned and purposefully leaned in closer to Naruto. Just loud enough for Sakura to hear, she increased her voice. Ino's tone was sweet and saccharine as she continued, Isn't it wonderful, Naruto-kun? Spending the morning together, just you and me. Sakura squeezed her fists against the need to respond. She clenched her teeth and her eyes glowed with rage. Ino, she whispered to herself. At last, Sakura's voice was loud enough to break the morning silence. Since when does Ino train? And why is Naruto the one training her? With a smug expression, Ino tilted her head and looked at Sakura. Oh, Sakura, you didn't know? I've decided to get stronger, and who better to help me than my amazing future husband? She grinned. Enjoy the view, forehead. Sakura became furious as her face flushed. She started to respond, but as she saw something that hurt more than Ino's taunts. Naruto didn't even look her in the eye. The words froze in her throat. He continued to walk with a blank expression on his face and his eyes focused on the road ahead. It was as though Sakura didn't exist to him. She felt as though she had been punched in the stomach by his lack of concern. Sakura's rage subsided and was replaced by a profound emptiness. Naruto, what happened to you? She pondered. Why did you grow so aloof? Sakura could still hear Ino's upbeat voice discussing their training goals as Naruto and Ino left. Every syllable caused her chest to twist like a dagger. At the same time, Kakashi Hitaki was standing in front of Tsunade in the Hokage's office, looking solemn. As he gave his report, the room fell into a deep quiet, replacing the often playful tone. 5 villages, muttered Kakashi dully. Completely wiped out in just 2 weeks. The attackers left no survivors. Men, women, children, all slaughtered. Tsunade slumped back in her chair, her brows severely furrowed. This is worse than we thought. Do we have any idea who's responsible? Kakashi gave a headshake. There isn't any hard proof yet, but they're vicious, according to reports. He paused, his voice trailing off. They violated the women before killing them. They're not just attackers, they're monsters. Tsunade balled her hands into fists. This is a dark force heading our way. But will we be ready for them when they arrive? Kakashi gave nod. We have our best shinobi on standby. Sasuke is already preparing strategies and... Tsunade abruptly interrupted, don't mention Naruto, in a worried tone. He's far from us now. I'm worried about him, Kakashi. He's changed so much, and I fear it's only getting worse. Kakashi rubbed the back of his head and moaned. He's troubled, that's for sure. But he's still my student. He'll listen to me if I talk to him. Tsunade's eyebrow went up. Do you remember the last time you talked to him? 2 weeks ago? Kakashi flinched, remembering the exchange. Yeah, he told me he didn't need advice from a perverted old man who reads trashy books. Tsunade laughed sourly. He insulted me too. Called me a drunken old hag, who's good for nothing but drinking. Kakashi laughed uneasily. Well, he's not entirely wrong. Tsunade gave him a fierce look before letting out a sigh. Naruto and Ino, what's their story? How did they even end up together? Kakashi crossed his arms and leaned against the desk. It's quite the tale. Seems like Ino latched onto him after he hit a rough patch. They've been inseparable ever since. She even moved in with him. Tsunade gave a contemplative nod. It's unusual, but love works in mysterious ways. Maybe Ino's exactly what Naruto needs right now. She's bold, confident, and unafraid to challenge him. Kakashi's eyebrow went up. But what about Hinata? She's been in love with Naruto forever. This can't be easy for her. With a solemn gaze, Tsunade leaned forward. Kakashi, let's be honest. Hinata isn't the right match for Naruto. First, she's too timid. She can't even hold a conversation with him without fainting. Second, Naruto doesn't feel anything for her. He doesn't even seem to remember she exists half the time. Kakashi scowled but remained silent. Tsunade went on. Ino, on the other hand, is everything Hinata isn't. She's strong, confident, and unafraid to go after what she wants. She won't let anyone get between her and Naruto. I've known Ino for years. She's my student, and I can see it in her eyes. She genuinely loves him. Kakashi gave a slow nod. You might be right. If anyone can break through Naruto's walls, it's her. Let's just hope he opens his heart before it's too late. Tsunade gave a small smile. Love can do incredible things, Kakashi. Maybe, just maybe, Ino's love will save him. Kakashi laughed. Well, it'll certainly be an interesting story to watch unfold. After a silent period of contemplation, Kakashi got up. For now, we focus on the looming threat. But I'll keep an eye on Naruto. He's still my student, and I won't give up on him. Tsunade gave a nod. Good. Let's hope love and war don't collide in ways we can't control. Then, with thoughts of imminent peril and the brittleness of friendship and love circling his mind, Kakashi exited the office. Before them lay the training grounds, a wide, open space with trees all around and training dummies and equipment strewn about. The crispness of the early air was accompanied by the distant chirping of birds and the subtle aroma of grass. With deliberate steps and an attitude as composed and solemn as ever, Naruto guided Ino to the middle of the field. In contrast, Ino was almost pulsing with vitality. She extended her arms, rotated her shoulders, and looked intently at Naruto. "All right, Naruto-kun," she responded with assurance. "Let's get started." With his arms folded, Naruto looked at her. She was certainly talented in her own right, but he couldn't help but notice something. "There's something we need to address before we begin," Naruto stated in a level tone. Curious, Ino cocked her head. "What is it?" "Quite plainly, you're too weak physically," he observed. "If you want to get stronger, you need to build your endurance and strength first. Otherwise, you won't last in a real fight." For a second, Ino's self-assured face wavered. "Hey, you're supposed to be my boyfriend and fiancé, not my critic." Naruto gave a shrug. "The truth is better than empty compliments. If you really want to improve, you need to hear it." Ino crossed her arms and pouted. "Fine. You're right. So, what's your brilliant plan, sensei?" With a little smirk, Naruto approached a storage shed nearby. He brought back a set of weighted equipment made especially for rigorous physical training. "We'll start with these," he said, indicating the weights on his legs. Ino's gaze expanded. "Those are your weights, aren't they? You've used these before?" Naruto gave a nod. "They'll push you to your limits. Trust me, you'll feel the difference." Ino reluctantly consented to Naruto fastening the weights on her legs. A blast of wind blew across the field as he fastened the final strap, slightly raising the hem of Ino's skirt. A slight flush tinted Naruto's cheeks as his eyes became wide and he turned away. Ever the perceptive one, Ino saw his reaction and burst out laughing. With a tone full of playful mischief, she questioned, "Did you get a good look, Naruto-kun?" Naruto whispered, "Let's concentrate on training," attempting to bring the discussion back to the subject at hand. Ino lowered her voice to a seductive whisper as she leaned closer. She hesitated, then continued with a teasing grin, "But since it's you, Naruto-kun, you're allowed to look as much as you want. You know," she said in a tone that was both seductive and threatening, "if anyone else saw my underwear, I'd kill them on the spot." Naruto became more flushed. "Cut it out, Ino," he murmured, attempting to remain calm. Ino wasn't finished, though. In a flirtatious gesture, she slightly raised her skirt to show off her purple panties. "Isn't it cute?" she said in a mockingly innocent tone. With a sigh, Naruto's cheeks flushed deeply. He yelled, "Stop playing around." With a giggle, Ino pulled her skirt down. All right, let's get serious." They started with simple physical activities. Naruto made Ino begin with lunges, which made every step difficult due to the extra weight on her legs. At first, Ino moved slowly and deliberately as she struggled. She persevered in spite of the challenge, her resolve unflinching. Naruto remarked, "Good," after examining her shape. "Now, let's move on to push-ups." After falling to the ground, Ino started the exercise. She was having trouble breathing and her arms were shaking by the sixth push-up. The words, "This is brutal," came out. Naruto was kneeling next to her. "Come on, Ino. You've got this. Just a few more." When she was done, Ino collapsed on the ground, having clenched her teeth and pushed through the remaining push-ups. With each deep breath, her chest rose and fell as she lay there for a minute, gazing up at the sky. She whispered, "This had better be worth it." Naruto laughed, "You'll thank me later." They went on to a range of exercises, each one getting harder than the one before. With her body hurting and her muscles screaming in protest, Ino pushed herself harder than she had ever done. She didn't give up, though. Naruto finally called for a break after what seemed like an eternity. Sweat trickled from Ino's brow as she fell to the grass. Her expression was a mixture of frustration and tiredness as she glanced up at Naruto. "All right," she responded in a raspy voice. "What's next, sensei? Another round of torture?" Naruto grinned. "That was just the warm-up, now we start the real training." Ino's eyes became wide with shock. "What? That was just the warm-up?" Naruto gave a nod. "If you want to get stronger, you've got to push past your limits. You're doing great so far." Ino glared at him as she sat up. "You're a sadist, Naruto-kun. A total sadist." Naruto chuckled. "Maybe, but you're the one who asked for this." They proceeded to training for combat. In a defensive position, Naruto gestured for Ino to strike. Her actions were driven by resolve and frustration as she charged at him. Naruto effortlessly avoided the punch that Ino delivered. She kicked back, but Naruto grabbed her leg in midair. He remarked, "You're leaving yourself wide open," in a cool, instructive tone. Ino gave a frustrated snarl. Pulling her leg back, she launched another attack, this time with more force and speed. However, Naruto easily blocked each one. Ino started to feel the effects of her fatigue as the sparring went on. Her attacks lost their accuracy as her movements became clumsy. "Come on, Ino," Naruto replied in a supportive tone. "You've got more in you. Show me what you've got." Ino's anger boiled over as she tightened her hands. "Am I truly so frail?" she pondered. "No, I am capable of doing this." She charged at Naruto once more with newfound vigor. Now she concentrated her chakra, directing it into her blows. Her actions grew more deliberate and incisive. When Naruto saw the shift, his eyes narrowed. He responded, "That's more like it," with a tone of pride. Naruto was forced to strengthen his defenses as a result of Ino's barrage of assaults. She was able to punch him for the first time, her fist making contact with his shoulder. Naruto grinned. "Good, now we're getting somewhere." They kept sparring, pushing Ino farther and farther each time. Ino felt a sense of accomplishment in spite of the difficulties. She was getting stronger, psychologically and physically. Ino was exhausted by the end of the workout. Her body ached as she fell to the ground, but she had a satisfied smile on her face. Naruto knelt next to her and extended his hand. He remarked, "You did well today, but this is just the beginning." Ino accepted his hand and let him assist her in standing up. "I'll get stronger," she declared with a determined tone. "I'll become someone you can be proud of, Naruto-kun." With a rare tenderness in his face, Naruto grinned. "You already are." With a feeling of pride building in his chest, Naruto looked at Ino as they packed up their belongings and got ready to depart. This was only the beginning of their adventure together, and he had faith that he and Ino could overcome any obstacles that might arise. Saying, "Let's head home," Ino took his hand again and nodded. They headed back toward the village together, prepared to take on whatever lay ahead. As Naruto busied himself in the kitchen, the little apartment was filled with the reassuring buzz of activity. A cozy, welcoming ambiance was produced by the gentle clatter of cutlery, the hiss of boiling water, and the enticing scent of freshly cooked meals. He labored meticulously, perfectly seasoning the food, searing the steak, and chopping the vegetables. Steamed rice, grilled teriyaki salmon, miso soup, and a vibrant assortment of stir-fried veggies comprised tonight's menu, which combined simplicity and decadence. As Naruto carefully and tastefully placed the food on the dining table, he looked at the clock. Each plate had a set of nicely folded napkins next to it, along with shiny chopsticks. A solitary white lily in a little vase served as the focal point, and the scene was graced by the delicate petals of the lily. After a few seconds, Ino came out of the bathroom as the sound of the running water ceased. Her damp blonde hair fell over her shoulders as she wore a white silk robe that hugged delicately to her body. As she made her way to the dining room, the soft fabric of the robe gave away her form, revealing the toned lines of her legs and the soft curve of her waist. Ino exclaimed, "Wow, Naruto-kun," with sincere respect in her voice. Her blue eyes glistened as she admired the exquisitely arranged table while running her fingers through her moist hair. "This is amazing. You really went all out." Naruto gave a small nod, still concentrating on the finishing touches. He stated, "I wanted it to be special," in a lighthearted yet subtly affectionate tone. "Enjoy." With her eyes wide as she took in the spread in front of her, Ino pulled out a chair and sat down. This, she shouted, pointing enthusiastically at the dish. "It's incredible, beautiful, perfect." With a laugh, Naruto sat down opposite her. "Thanks, now eat before it gets cold." Grabbing her chopsticks, Ino bit into the salmon. As the flavors exploded on her tongue, she closed her eyes in joy. The words, "Oh my god," she whispered. "Naruto-kun, this is amazing. You're not just a hero, you're a chef too." Naruto smiled slightly, but his thoughts appeared far away. Naruto's thoughts wandered, slipping into the shadowy recesses of his most recent dreams while Ino went on to compliment his meal. He was plagued by a vision of a man, a shadowy, vile creature with a huge scythe in his hands. In these dreams, the man's weapon sliced through the defenseless with merciless efficiency, bringing death with him wherever he went. Naruto could practically see the victim's lifeless eyes, hear the screams, and feel the cold clutch of fear. The dream was weighing him down, and he shivered. He had recently heard rumors of a new danger, an unidentified organization that had destroyed 5 villages in 2 weeks. Their ruthlessness knew no limits, and they left no survivors. Women endured horrible tragedies, and men were massacred. His skin crawled at the idea of such depravity. When Ino called out, "Hey, Naruto-kun," he was brought back to the present. When Naruto realized he had been staring at his plate without any intention, he blinked. Ino was leaning toward him, her face inches from his, when he looked up. She said, "You've been zoning out," in a lighthearted but slightly worried tone. "What's going on in that thick skull of yours?" Naruto gave a headshake. "Nothing important," he said, attempting to push the gloomy thoughts away. Ino was not persuaded. She smirked after narrowing her gaze. "Well, whatever it is, I've got a better idea. Imagine, grapes." Naruto's eyebrow went up. "Grapes?" "Yes, grapes. Green ones, purple ones, juicy and delicious." She laughed. "Can you do that?" Naruto gave an eye roll. "Even my imagination isn't safe from you, huh?" Ino laughed. With her chopsticks, she held a piece of salmon, ready to feed him. "Exactly. Now, open up," she said. Naruto paused. "Is this necessary?" "Yes," Ino firmly said. "I'm your future wife, after all." Naruto let out a sigh. "You're not my wife. Not yet," Ino clarified, her eyes shining with a lighthearted resolve. "But I will be. Now, open up." Naruto opened his mouth reluctantly, and Ino gave him the salmon bite. She grinned contentedly. "See, isn't that nice?" Naruto shook his head a little as he chewed. "You're something else, Ino." "My turn," Ino said, her mouth hanging open in anticipation. Accepting his fate, Naruto grabbed a vegetable and gave it to her. Ino made a show of how good it was, exaggerating how much she enjoyed it. "Delicious," she says. As they carried on with their lighthearted dinner, Naruto was momentarily distracted from his melancholy thoughts by Ino's fun antics. However, the burden of his dreams reappeared as the evening went on. Ino insisted that Naruto stay with her and dragged him to her room as they got ready for bed. She changed into a nightgown that was light and semi-transparent, leaving little room for interpretation. As she came into bed next to him, Naruto couldn't help but blush because of the lovely contrast between its pale tint and her skin. Ino laid her head on his naked chest and whispered, "Good night, Naruto-kun," in a gentle voice. The warmth of her body was soothing and distracting, and her soft blonde hair caressed his skin. In an attempt to slow his pounding heart, Naruto lay still. Sleep, however, did not bring tranquility. He found himself in the nightmare once more. The residents of the 6th settlement screamed in fear as it burnt. Women, gathered together with ripped clothing and terrified looks. The figure without a face reappeared, his scythe shining in the firelight. Those who attempted to stand in his way were slain by his frightful grace. Naruto's respiration accelerated. The scythe swung toward the man's neck, and he felt the lifeless, cold eyes pierce him. He awoke with a start, his chest heaving and his body drenched in sweat. Beside him, Ino woke up and muttered something incoherently while she slept. With a slight trail of drool on his chest and her gentle breath against his skin, she automatically held on to him even more. Naruto looked down and saw that her nightgown had changed, which made his face flush. The fabric barely covered her breasts, allowing him to see their curvature. Carefully shifting so as not to wake her, he swallowed hard, but the horror continued to plague his thoughts. Meanwhile, the real horror took place in the 6th village's shadows. Amidst the rubble, a menacing person wearing a dark robe stood. His supporters huddled around him, masks covering their faces. The leader's voice was icy and authoritative as he inquired, "Did you kill all the men?" "Yes, my lord," said one of the staff members. "And the women?" "They're here." A small child was pulled forward, her terrified eyes wide. With her garments ripped and tears streaming down her cheeks, she fought against the hold of her kidnapper. The commander took a step forward and grasped her chin with his gloved hand. He smiled cruelly as he examined her, tilting her face upward. His words were laced with hatred. "We'll enjoy ourselves tonight," he said. She screamed in desperation as his hand traveled to her chest and squeezed. The men in his immediate vicinity chuckled, their eyes shining with twisted eagerness. With a sly smile, the leader tightened his hold. "We'll rule this world soon," he declared, his voice brimming with sinister promise. A terrifying foreshadowing to the horrors to follow, his laughter reverberated throughout the night. The bedroom was bathed in a warm glow as the morning sun came through the drapes. Ino was stretched next to Naruto when he slowly opened his eyes and stirred. Despite her unkempt blonde hair, she exuded calmness, her chest softly rising and falling with each breath. Ino's eyelids flitted open as Naruto attempted to move and get out of bed. Her voice was low and playful, and she smiled mischievously. "Why are you in such a hurry, Naruto-kun? Stay a little longer." Ino quickly straddled him and pinned him back to the bed before he could react. Leaning forward, she exposed her large chest by letting her robe fall slightly. She whispered, "Enjoy the view," with a cheeky sparkle in her eyes. As he fought to move away, Naruto's face went beet red as his hands clumsily hovered in midair. "Ino, come on. Let me up." Ino leaned over to give him a gentle kiss while giggling. "Good morning, Naruto-kun." His flush deepened as he sighed. "Good morning, and it's Naruto, not Naruto-kun or whatever." Ino smirked and cocked her head, seemingly thinking about what he had said. But I like Naruto-kun. It's cute. From now on, I'm calling you Naruko." He was finally able to sit up as she climbed off him. Ino sat on the bed, her fingertips delicately tracing the fabric of her robe, while Naruto left the room to dress. Her heart pounding, she pushed her palms to her chest. She whispered to herself, "This guy is driving me crazy," as a warm smile pulled at her lips. "His love is overwhelming. If only I had realized it sooner. I wasted so much time fawning over Sasuke back in the academy. What a fool I was." As she stood, resolve gleaming in her eyes, her smile widened. "But now, everything I have will be for Naruko." With practiced ease, Naruto made breakfast in the kitchen. The air was heavy with the aroma of grilled fish, rice, and eggs. After a while, Ino joined him, and they ate together while laughing and having light chat. Following breakfast, Ino put on her exercise attire, which consisted of a sleek black sports bra and leggings that accentuated her athletic body. After grabbing his equipment, Naruto and his companions set out for their training area. The crisp, energizing morning air swept across the vast field in front of them. The tranquil atmosphere was enhanced by the distant sound of a river and the chirping of birds from the surrounding trees. Naruto stretched his arms above his head and replied, "Okay, Ino. Today, we're going to figure out your elemental affinity." Perplexed, Ino blinked. "Elemental affinity? What's that?" Naruto crossed his arms and smiled. "It's your natural connection to one of the 5 basic elements: wind, water, earth, fire, and lightning. There's also wood, but it's pretty rare and usually requires a unique bloodline." Ino's head cocked. "Okay, but how do we figure that out?" Naruto's tone changed to that of a teacher as he started to explain. "Each shinobi has a natural chakra affinity. It's like a talent for manipulating one element more easily than the others. For example, if your affinity is fire, you'll have an easier time learning fire-based jutsu. It's important to know your affinity so you can tailor your training." With a nod, Ino took in the information. "That makes sense. So, what's your affinity?" With a sly smile, Naruto took a tiny, thin piece of paper out of his pouch. "Wind. And we're going to find out yours with this." Ino gazed incredulously at the page. "A piece of paper? You're joking, right?" With a stern gaze, Naruto shook his head. "No joke. This isn't ordinary paper. It's chakra paper. It reacts to your chakra and shows your elemental affinity." He gave an example by directing a tiny quantity of chakra onto the paper. It split cleanly down the middle in an instant. "See? Wind affinity. Now, it's your turn." Ino took the paper cautiously and paused. "You're really serious about this, huh?" With encouraging eyes, Naruto nodded. "Go on, give it a try." Ino closed her eyes and gripped the page with both hands. Willing her chakra to flow into the paper, she concentrated on it. "Please don't embarrass me in front of Naruko," she pleaded quietly inside. The paper reacted a second later. Just like Naruto's, it broke cleanly in 2. Naruto smiled with satisfaction as his eyes widened a little. "Wow, Ino. You've got wind affinity too. That's pretty rare." Ino's eyes glowed with anticipation as her jaw fell. "Really? I'm rare? Just like you?" Naruto gave a nod. "Yeah, wind is one of the least common affinities. You've got a real talent here." With a cheer of excitement, Ino threw her arms around Naruto and embraced him tightly. "Yes, I'm rare. I'm awesome," she said, planting a quick, joyous kiss on Naruto's lips before he could respond. As he attempted to gently push her away, Naruto's cheeks flushed. "Ino, come on, we're supposed to be training." Ino, however, was too happy to give a damn. She pumped her fists in the air as she leapt around the training field. "Wind affinity. I'm going to be the best wind user ever." Her eagerness and energy reminded Naruto of his younger self, and he couldn't help but smile. In the back of his consciousness, Kurama, the enormous 9 tails that were locked within him, stirred. Kurama said, "She's got spirit," his deep voice reverberating in Naruto's mind. "Reminds me of your mother, Kushina. Always full of energy." Naruto gave himself a little laugh. "Yeah, she's definitely something." With her eyes shining with resolve, Ino halted her joyous dance and faced Naruto once more. "All right, Naruto. Let's get back to training. I'm ready for anything." Naruto grinned as his own enthusiasm grew. "You got it, Ino. Let's do this." As a result, Ino was more focused than ever on mastering her newfound power as they began their training. As Naruto and Ino fought at the training grounds, the sun was shining brightly. As Ino matched each of Naruto's attacks, her movements were smooth and her attention was acute. She was determined, but Naruto's cool head and accurate blows kept her alert. Naruto replied, "Come on, Ino. Focus your chakra, and don't just react. Predict my next move," in a strong but upbeat tone. With a nod, Ino changed her position. "Got it, Naruto." They kept going until a black blur arose in front of them after another fierce round. A masked Anbu member appeared, towering and commanding. The Anbu continued, "Uzumaki Naruto. Yamanaka Ino. The Hokage requests your presence immediately," in a stern and commanding tone. With a frown, Ino moved onward. "Hey, who do you think you are, interrupting my precious training time with Naruto, you jerk?" With a sigh, Naruto held up a hand to soothe her. "It's fine, Ino. Let's go." With a pout, Ino gave in. "Fine. But we're stopping at home first. No way am I walking into the Hokage's office in my training gear. I don't want anyone seeing me like this. Only you, Naruto." They followed the Anbu back toward the village as Naruto gave a slight smirk. As soon as she got home, Ino changed into a simple yet fashionable ensemble consisting of knee-high boots, a short white skirt, and a lavender shirt. She had her hair in a tidy ponytail. Already dressed in his trademark white-on-white outfit, Naruto exuded a calm assurance. Everyone's eyes were on them as they entered the Hokage's office. There were several familiar figures in the room, including Sasuke, Sakura, Shikamaru, Hinata, and Kakashi. For a brief while, Sasuke's normally austere demeanor softened as he continued to stare at Naruto. "He's greatly changed," Sasuke reflected. "No more orange. He appears to be sophisticated. Like a model, almost." Sakura, who was standing next to Sasuke, blushed a little as she observed Naruto's transformation. His slender yet muscular body was emphasized by the stark white clothing, and his bright blue eyes appeared even more piercing. Remembering Naruto's sharp tongue and the reports of his stinging sarcasm, she blushed but remained silent. With a smug expression on her face, Ino grasped Naruto's hand with assurance as he entered silently, his countenance blank. Naruto calmly remarked, "All right, we're here. What's the big deal?" while keeping his eyes on Tsunade, the Hokage. Tsunade motioned to everyone to have a seat. "I'll explain once everyone's settled." Sakura scowled. "Who are we waiting for?" Then Ino moved forward, grinning mischievously. "Why, hello, forehead. It's been a while." The moniker made Sakura angry, but she remained silent. While his gaze briefly locked with Sasuke's, Naruto remained mute. Although neither of them said anything, Sasuke couldn't help but observe Naruto's icy distancing. Recalling their last meeting from years ago, Sasuke thought, "He's not the same idiot from before." Tsunade started when everyone had taken their seats. "I've called you here to discuss a serious matter. Over the past few weeks, a group of unknown assailants has been targeting villages. They've destroyed entire communities, killed the men, and—" She stopped and darkened her expression. "Assaulted the women." It became tense in the room. Ino looked at Naruto and clenched her fists. She kept thinking about that assignment, the one in which she had nearly fallen prey to it herself. Had it not been for Naruto's prompt action. Tsunade went on. "The most recent attack was on Hoshigakure. They left no survivors. Our intelligence suggests they may be planning their next move, and it's only a matter of time before another village falls." Naruto squinted his eyes. "What's the mission?" "This is a high-priority mission. Failure is not an option," Tsunade stated, her gaze still fixed on Naruto. "You'll be working together to track these attackers and eliminate the threat." Hinata, who had been observing silently, looked down with a heavy heart. Glancing at Ino, who was now leaning casually on Naruto, she thought sadly, "It should have been me by his side." Shikamaru crossed his arms and sighed. "Sounds troublesome." Still shaken by Naruto's arrival, Sakura attempted to hide her uneasiness. "We'll do our best, Lady Tsunade." Ino moved forward after observing Sakura's prolonged attention on Naruto. Hey, forehead, still single? Or did someone finally put a ring on that giant forehead of yours? Sakura became furious as her face flushed. What did you just say, pig? You heard me, forehead, Ino smirked and retorted. With verbal insults and mild slaps, the two surged at one another. And with a sigh, Sasuke muttered, this is ridiculous. Leaning against the wall, Shikamaru spoke in an irritated tone, troublesome. Hinata got up and attempted to step in. Please, stop fighting. Enough. Tsunade slammed her hand on the desk and her voice thundered. There was silence in the room. Both of you, sit down. Sakura and Ino scowled at one another but obeyed. Tsunade rubbed her temples and moaned. Naruto, control your fiancé, will you? With a dry tone, Naruto raised an eyebrow. She's not my fiancé, and that's none of your business, old lady. Tsunade maintained her cool despite a vein popping on her forehead. But Sakura was less reticent. Naruto. That's no way to talk to Lady Tsunade. Naruto turned to face her with a sardonic tone in his voice. And you should mind your own business, bubblegum. After a little period of silence, Ino started giggling. Bubblegum? Oh, that's priceless? I wish I'd thought of that one. Sakura blushed, embarrassed and angry at the same time. Why, you? Tsunade held up her hand before she could say anything further. Enough. All of you, focus. You have a mission to prepare for. Pushing off the wall, Shikamaru made his way to the door. Let's get this over with. As they left the office, Naruto silently followed, Ino by his side, her laughter still resonating. The task crew discreetly jumped from tree to tree as they made their way through the thick forest. The only sounds were the gentle thuds of their feet on the bark and the rustle of leaves. The group was led by Naruto, whose golden hair caught the dappled sunshine that came through the canopy. Since they'd left the village, he'd said nothing. His gaze stayed on the road ahead, inscrutable and far away. Ino trailed closely behind, occasionally turning to look at Naruto. The way his hair shone, his pale skin gleaming almost ethereally, and his face, which had developed a sophisticated, almost androgynous attractiveness over the years, everything made her want to appreciate him. As she thought, I really made a good choice, her cheeks turned red. Sakura stood behind them, watching Naruto with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. She attempted to make sense of the difference between the boisterous, happy youngster she used to know and this quiet, collected man. When did he turn into this person? He is incredible. She flushed, ashamed of her own ideas. Hinata, however, was finding it difficult to remain calm. Her heart ached with each glimpse as she continued to focus on Naruto. Naruto-kun. She thought, but her eyes went to Ino, who appeared completely comfortable next to him. She was deeply saddened by the sight. I ought to have been the one. But now that he was beside her. Hinata dropped her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. Sasuke kept quiet, staring at Naruto with his black gaze. His thoughts were racing through his head. He has changed a lot. There's no denying that presence, that atmosphere. He's not the stupid child who was running after me anymore. Sasuke tightened his jaw. What type of life did he lead that led to this state of affairs? Constantly perceptive, Shikamaru looked thoughtfully at Naruto. He thought, something's off. His eyes have a dark quality. Is it animosity? Hatred? He remembered Naruto's utter isolation and withdrawal from society following the conflict. He didn't go to any of the events or memorial services. He shut himself in and came out, similar to this. All right. Shikamaru replied at last, ending the quiet. We'll rest here for now. They went down to a little clearing. They all started unpacking and erecting a temporary camp. But Naruto took a few steps back and sat with his back against the trunk of a big tree. Lost in meditation, he tipped his head back and narrowed his eyes as he gazed up at the sky. The eerie memory of his recurrent dream came back to Naruto. Amidst a sight of devastation, burning villages, broken houses, and dead bodies scattered all over the ground, a shadowy man stood. Even though the figure's face was hidden, their presence was blatantly hostile. Who are you? Naruto pondered. You torment me, but why? As he attempted to piece together the pieces of the dream, his palms curled into fists. Was this vision related to the devastation they were seeing into? He felt uneasy as the thought tormented him. Naruto. He was startled out of his reverie by the quiet voice. He looked over and saw Ino standing next to him, her face soft. Without waiting for an invitation, she put a hand on his shoulder and sat down. Hey, she replied softly, without the hint of mocking that normally accompanied her voice. Startled by her unexpected proximity, Naruto blinked, Ino put her head on his shoulder and leaned into him before he could answer. It was strange and comforting to feel her body against his. Despite a faint color to his cheeks, Naruto did not move. Ino entwined her fingers with his and grinned sweetly. Her very presence appeared to relieve the tension in his head, so she didn't need to say anything. Naruto let himself unwind for a minute, his mind calming as he concentrated on the steady cadence of her breathing. Hinata witnessed the scene from nearby. As she watched Ino lean into Naruto and place her hand in his, her heart squeezed terribly. Bitterly, she thought, it should have been me. I had loved him for a very long time. However, Hinata was aware that she was solely to fault. She had hesitated too much and waited too long. The location she had dreamed of was now Ino's. Hinata fought back tears, her hands shaking. She couldn't stand the sight any longer, so she turned away. I'm to blame for this. I lacked the courage. Shikamaru, meanwhile, watched things from a distance, using his keen intellect to piece together the dynamics within the group. Sakura is heartbroken, Hinata is heartbroken, Ino is bonded to him, and Naruto is distant. As usual, she's perplexed. He looked at Sasuke, who had his arms folded and was leaning against a tree. Even Sasuke appears uneasy by Naruto's metamorphosis. Shikamaru ran a hand through his hair and moaned. The opponent we are seeking is not the only aspect of this assignment. Naruto has a weighty object in his possession. And it has altered him, whatever it is. Ino moved slightly back under the tree, putting further pressure on Naruto. His body was tense, and she could sense the weight of whatever stress he was bearing. Naruto, she said, referring to the nickname she had given him with love. Whatever's on your mind, you're not alone. I'm here. Naruto gave her a quick glance, his eyes briefly becoming softer. The faintest of smiles tugged at the corners of his mouth, but he made no answer. Ino felt her heart grow. His presence was sufficient, she didn't need his words. Naruto's mind wandered back to the mysterious figure from his dream as the camp fell into an uncomfortable silence. I will locate you, whoever you are. I'll stop you, too. He had a sneaking suspicion, though, that this expedition might lead him closer to the answers he was looking for, and to the darkness he feared. The overwhelming smell of blood and death overwhelmed the team's senses as they gingerly entered the village's ruins. Structures were in ruins, charred and falling apart. Broken bodies and trash filled the ground. Women who had lost their lives and dignity were lying strewn all over the streets. Their bodies were brutalized, their faces frozen in fear. The scene was nearly unbearable. With tears in her eyes, Ino clenched her jaw. She grabbed Naruto's hand and held it firmly. This is horrible, she said in a tremulous tone. Although Naruto's face was expressionless, there was a glimmer of emotion in his eyes. He felt as though he would throw up as his stomach rumbled. But he forced himself to remain calm and swallowed the bile rising in his throat. Sai grimaced as she stood a few meters away. He mumbled, so, this is what they've been doing, with a tone of distaste. Sakura clenched her hands and knelt next to one of the dead women. These monsters, she spit out in a low, angry voice. How could anyone do this? Hinata's eyes were wide with grief and terror as she remained motionless. The sight of the carnage was too much for her to bear. Instead, with her hands shaking, she looked down. This is sickening, Shikamaru remarked as he produced a map. But we need to focus. Let's search for survivors. The gang dispersed, looking for any traces of life among the debris. However, Naruto stayed motionless, his eyes averted. His head was elsewhere, lost in a fog of memories and ideas. He was suddenly struck by a vision. His surroundings became hazy, giving way to bright, terrifying pictures. He saw the village as it had been, prosperous and serene. Then the cloaked invaders arrived, bringing murder and ruin. They pulled ladies from their hiding spots and burned houses while laughing. He witnessed their ruthlessness and wickedness. One sight in particular dominated his vision. A small girl, almost conscious, abandoned beneath the debris, forgotten in their hysteria. Naruto's breath came in short, shallow gasps as his eyes jerked open. His heart thumped in his chest, and sweat trickled down his face. Naruto. Ino's voice shattered his reverie. Her hands were on his shoulders as she stood next to him. What's wrong? Naruto-ko, talk to me. His vision cleared as he blinked. His voice was husky as he fought to find the words, I. Shikamaru stepped forward, his face serious. We've searched everywhere. There are no survivors. Naruto's determination hardened as he shook his head. There's someone. Shikamaru scowled. What are you talking about? We've looked. Without waiting for an answer, Naruto turned and started to move with deliberate strides. I said, He interjected in a stern tone, "There's someone." With concern in her voice, Ino called after him, "Naruto, where are you going?" He remained focused and didn't respond. After exchanging doubtful looks, the group followed him. Naruto guided them through the debris while reliving the scene in his head. He came to a sudden stop in front of a structure that had fallen. He started removing the debris without hesitation, moving quickly and resolutely. "Here," he remarked in a quiet but confident tone. The others looked on in shock. Shikamaru moved to the front. "Naruto, are you sure?" Naruto discovered a tiny figure under the debris before he could finish. He saw the girl he had seen, breathing and barely alive. Sakura hurried to the girl's side after gasping. She evaluated her condition rapidly. She said, "She's alive," with a wave of relief. "But she's in bad shape. We need to treat her immediately." Shikamaru's thoughts were racing as he gazed at Naruto. How did he find out? With thoughts that mirrored Shikamaru's, Sasuke's eyes narrowed. What is the matter with him? Naruto stood calmly, his eyes once again far away, while Sakura and Hinata tried to steady the girl. He experienced a feeling of vertigo as his body swung slightly. "Naruto?" Ino asked in a worried tone. Observing his pale face and the perspiration on his forehead, she took a step closer. "Are you okay?" He murmured, "I'm fine," but his voice was unconvinced. "Just tired." Ino was not persuaded. She took his hand and held on tightly. "Come on, you need to rest." Naruto let her guide him back to the camp without objecting. He was so exhausted that he passed out as soon as his head struck the pillow. As she knelt next to him, Ino looked over his face. In his sleep, he appeared so serene and defenseless. She grabbed the blanket and pulled it over them both. After a little pause, she took off her outer garments, revealing only a basic bra and shorts. She sighed as she unclasped her bra and let it drop away since the cloth felt tight. She lay next to Naruto, her bare skin rubbing against his as she laid her head on his chest. She could hear his heart beating steadily, a sound that soothed her own. Ino's eyes were warm with concern as she ran her fingers through his hair. She whispered, "Please be okay, Naruto-ko," and planted a gentle kiss on his forehead. She remained by his side as the night went on, her protective instincts taking over. She was prepared to meet any obstacles head-on with him, together. The makeshift camp was bathed in a warm glow as the morning sun slowly rose above the horizon. The little girl awoke inside a tiny tent, her eyelashes flickering open. Every muscle in her body ached, objecting to even the smallest movement. Her vision gradually came into focus as she blinked. A gentle voice called out to her. "Good morning," Hinata remarked with a comforting, warm grin. Her purple eyes were full of real worry as she knelt down to the girl. "Are you feeling better?" The girl's eyes widened in terror as she winced. She made an attempt to push herself away but soon gave up because her body was too weak to do it. Her voice was tremulous and hoarse as she yelled, "Leave me alone. Please, I didn't do anything, don't hurt me." Light as a feather, Hinata put a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. Softly, "It's okay," she said. "We're not going to hurt you. We're here to help." The girl's eyes darted about the tent as if looking for a way out, and her breathing was labored. Just then, Sakura came in with a small medical kit. When she saw the terrified girl, her face softened. She said, "Hey there," in a soft voice. "You're safe now." The girl's mouth trembled. I don't understand." Sakura knelt next to her and took out a tiny gadget to feel her pulse. She reassured her, "You're okay," while her hands worked effectively. "They didn't get to you, thank goodness. You're going to be just fine." Shortly later, Shikamaru came up with his hands slackly in his pockets. He smiled a little kindly at the girl. "Morning," he said. "How are you holding up?" Tears filled the girl's eyes. "They killed everyone," she said in a scarcely audible whisper. "My family, my mother," she said, choking as sobs ripped through her body. They. Shikamaru gently held up a hand. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," he stated. "Right now, the important thing is that you're safe." Hinata gave a nod. Her voice was quiet as she inquired, "What's your name?" After a moment of hesitation, the girl whispered, "Aya." Hinata grinned once again. "That's a beautiful name, Aya. My name is Hinata. This is Sakura, and that's Shikamaru." Sakura waved slightly, and Shikamaru acknowledged with a nod. Shikamaru went on to say, "We have a couple of others in our group, Sasuke, and Naruto." Aya's expression brightened a little when Naruto was brought up. "Naruto," she said again, quietly, "I like that name." Naruto, meanwhile, stirred in another tent. After a deep, much-needed sleep, His body felt renewed and his vitality was restored. When he gently opened his eyes, he saw Ino standing there. She had a calm smile on her lips as she leaned on him, her blonde hair falling over her shoulders. "Morning, Naruto-ko," she whispered tenderly as she leaned in to give him a little peck on the cheek. Naruto blinked in surprise for a second. He was about to reply when he noticed that Ino's chest was exposed, but his words got stuck in his throat. He became very red in the face. He turned his head away in shame and stumbled, "Ino, put some clothes on." Ino laughed, obviously taking pleasure in his response. She teasingly said, "Oh, come on, Naruto-ko, you're going to be my husband one day. What's the big deal?" Naruto let out a moan. "Just, put something on, please." Fine, sighed Ino playfully. She held up her bra as she reached for it. "Help me with this, will you? You know my chest is too big for this thing. I really need to get a new one." Naruto's face glowed even more intensely. "Ino," she murmured, "come on," as she turned away from him, "just fasten it for me." Naruto sighed in resignation, sat up, and grudgingly assisted her. As he fastened the clasp, his hands fumbled a little. "There," he muttered, rapidly stepping back. Ino spun around and gave him a cunning smile. She remarked, "You're such a good boy," and leaned in to kiss him on the lips. However, as the kiss intensified, she inserted her tongue inside Naruto's mouth before he could retreat. When Naruto attempted to shove her away, his eyes widened, but Ino held on tightly. He had just succeeded in separating them when Sakura stormed into the tent. Sakura yelled, "Ino!" with a red face. "What the hell are you doing? This isn't a love hotel." Unfazed by the interruption, Ino grinned. Coolly, she responded, "Mind your own business, forehead." Sakura squinted her eyes. "What did you just call me?" "You heard me," Ino remarked as she got to her feet to confront her opponent. Their shouts became more passionate and louder as the two started to dispute. Seeing his chance, Naruto crept out of the tent while grumbling to himself about the mayhem he was leaving in his wake. He splashed cold water on his face as he walked to a nearby brook. Although the cold helped him think more clearly, a sense of dread still hung over him. "Something's wrong," he heard Kurama's deep voice say. Naruto scowled. "You feel it too?" Kurama gave a low growl. "There's a dangerous presence nearby. And this world, it's teetering on the edge of another war. We need to stop it before it starts." With a sigh, Naruto let his shoulders drop. "I don't even know if we can." Kurama's quiet said more than words could. The giant beast was uneasy since this was the first time Naruto had ever shown uncertainty about his own skills. Sasuke watched Naruto from a distance, his eyes narrowing as he took in his old friend's unsure position. Sasuke thought, "He's changed. Not only is he strong, but he is also confident. What did you do to him, Obito?" Naruto's gloomy thoughts caused him to look toward the horizon, the world's destiny. Anticipation felt thick in the dark light of a vast hideout. A shadow-covered figure stood in the middle of the room, his presence menacing and authoritative. The silence was broken by his strong, powerful voice. "So," he replied softly, with a frightening calm in his voice, "the ninja of Konoha have arrived." A dark armored man with a scar across his face, one of his subordinates, moved forward and bowed. "Yes, my lord. They've entered the village ruins and taken the survivor." With a sly smirk spreading across his lips, the commander, clad in a thick black cloak, cocked his head. His eyes shone with evil intentness. "Excellent," he whispered. "Today, we will show them our power. We will send a message not just to Konoha, but to the entire world." A chilly echo filled the room as his voice increased. "Prepare yourselves. The time has come for us to rise. We will crush these ninja and demonstrate the futility of resistance. Soon, they will know the terror of the headless rider." Among the assembled disciples, there was a murmur of agreement. The leader's fist clenched. "I will reclaim what is rightfully mine," he pledged. "And when I do, this world will kneel before me. The Age of Shadows begins now." His laughter echoed across the cavern as he flung back his head. His subordinates laughed too, their voices a clamor of malevolent intent. The mood was calm but tense back at the camp. With their attention on Aya, who was lying on a makeshift bed, the gang had assembled in one of the larger tents. She was shrouded in blankets, her face pallid but gradually coming back to life. Ino sat close by, watching the girl for any indications of pain with her keen blue eyes. With her arms folded, Sakura stood at the foot of the bed, keeping a close watch. Shikamaru leaned against a post, his calm intent taking the place of his normal slack attitude. While Hinata busied herself with herbal cures, Sasuke sat in the corner, silent and pensive. Naruto was the only one absent. He's outside, Shikamaru murmured in response to Sakura's inquiry. You know how he is, doesn't like crowds. Aya's eyelids fluttered wide as she stirred. She glanced about anxiously before focusing on Shikamaru. She said, Why? Why is he doing this? Why does the Headless Rider attack our villages? Shikamaru's gaze grew strained. That's what we're here to figure out, he stated. But you seem to know more than you're letting on. Why don't you start from the beginning? With her hands gripping the blanket, Aya paused. Her voice was shaking as she asked, Have you heard the legend? Sasuke's eyebrow went up. Which legend? Aya said, The legend of the Headless Rider. Sasuke gave a snort. Fairy tales. There's no such thing. Aya gave a firm shake of her head. No, it's real. He's real. He and his followers have been attacking villages, searching for something, someone. With a doubtful yet inquisitive gaze, Ino leaned forward. And what exactly are they looking for? Aya inhaled deeply. Someone with rare blood. Only their blood can open the gateway he seeks. Without it, he can't fully return to power. Shikamaru gave his chin a contemplative rub. Rare blood, huh? That's interesting. But still, a headless warrior? Sounds like something out of a ghost story. Aya's expression grew gloomy. My grandfather told me that when the Headless Rider rises, he seeks his missing head. Until he finds it, he'll kill anyone in his way. He believes the blood of the Chosen One will lead him to it. Despite her best efforts to conceal it, Ino shivered uncontrollably. The word, creepy, she whispered. Sakura grinned as she saw how uncomfortable Ino was. What's wrong, Ino? Scared of a little bedtime story. Shut up, forehead, Ino said, her confidence coming back. Shikamaru let out a sigh. This is turning into a weird mission, he stated, but if there's any truth to this legend, we're in deeper trouble than we thought. Aya gripped the blanket more tightly. He's ruthless. If he thinks you have what he's looking for, he won't stop until he gets it. Ino's thoughts drifted to Naruto. A knot of coldness formed in her stomach as she bit her lip. Is it possible? She thought, then shook the thought out of her head. No, that's absurd. Seeing her preoccupation, Sakura chose to make fun of her. What's wrong, Ino? Thinking about your Naruto-ko, again? Ino glared at her. Don't you have something better to do? As they exchanged insults, the two women began to argue, raising their voices. Sasuke gave an eye roll. Sharply, enough, he said. We need to move. If this rider is coming, we can't stay here. Shikamaru gave a nod. He's right. Pack up. Aya, you're coming with us. Despite her unsure expression, Aya nodded. She said, thank you, in a whisper. Naruto stood by himself outside, gazing off into the distance. He took slow, soothing breaths, his hair tousled by the morning breeze. His thoughts were racing through his head. He thought, Kurama was right. Something significant is about to happen. His head rumbled with Kurama's voice. Be on guard, Naruto. This rider isn't just a myth. I can feel his presence. He's watching us. Naruto squinted his eyes. He said, let him come. Sasuke watched him from the darkness, noticing the strain in his posture. He's changed, Sasuke thought. More risky and more closed off. Naruto felt a familiar weight suddenly resting on his back. Ino threw her arms around his shoulders and leapt onto him. She said, time to go, Naruto-ko, with a smile. Naruto let out a sigh. Get off, Ino. Nope, she exclaimed while laughing. Despite shaking his head, Naruto couldn't help but smile. Fine, let's go. The leader of the Headless Rider's followers watched via a crystal sphere far away in the concealed lair as the gang got ready to depart. Dark enjoyment shone in his eyes. There he is, he said, staring at Naruto. The one we've been searching for. A ruthless grin appeared on his face. Today, he'll know the true meaning of fear. His laughter reverberated around the room, and the sight faded. The leader stood in front of an old altar in the center of the darkened stronghold, his hands lifted as though speaking to an invisible power. The walls were covered with lengthy, warped shadows from the flickering torch's faint light. He spoke to his assembled followers, his voice resonating with passionate intensity. Soon, he said, his eyes shining with sinister intent, the ship will come. Inside him is the key. The latent force that will free our master from his never-ending captivity. The Headless Rider will rise again. With unflinching devotion, the crowd roared in unison. His eyes were sharp and haggard, and the leader turned to face his second in command. Whispering, I can feel it, the leader said. His chakra resonates with the seal. Naruto Uzumaki is the one we've been waiting for. The inferior bowed. Shall we proceed as planned, my lord? A sly smirk twisted the leader's lips. Yes. Set the trap. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late. In other areas, the Konoha crew advanced quickly through the thicket. Only little slivers of sunshine could pass through the dense canopy above. Everyone in the group was silent and concentrated on the task at hand. Aya gripped Shikamaru's shoulders hard as he carried her on his back, her eyes darting anxiously about their surroundings. Her eyes kept going to Naruto in spite of the uncomfortable situation. He strolled at the back, his eyes focused on the road ahead, his face impassive. In contrast to the others, who occasionally spoke to one another or checked in, Naruto was completely silent. He doesn't talk much, does he? Aya muttered as she snuggled in closer to Shikamaru. Shikamaru let out a sigh. Naruto's been through a lot, he's different now. Hinata's gentle eyes were filled with worry as she looked over her shoulder. Her words were soft. Naruto-kun has his own way of handling things, she remarked. Aya nodded, but she was still interested. She observed how Ino, a blonde female, would sometimes stroll next to Naruto while jokingly addressing him. In contrast to the others, Ino appeared totally comfortable and even playful in his presence. Softly, that girl, Aya said, she's not afraid of him. Shikamaru grinned. Ino's stubborn. She won't back down from anyone, not even Naruto. Sasuke abruptly stopped in front of them. His piercing gaze surveyed the area. With a mumble, "We're being watched." Tension rippled through the group as they came to a halt. Shikamaru scowled. No signs of movement, are you sure? The quiet was broken by Naruto's icy, deep voice. You're walking into a trap. Everybody looked at him. Sasuke's gaze grew strained. Explain. With his eyes focused on the road ahead, Naruto took a step forward. The air is too still. The birds stopped chirping 5 minutes ago. There's an ambush waiting for us. Shikamaru gave his neck a gentle stroke. You could have mentioned that sooner. Naruto's demeanor remained unchanged as his eyes darted in his direction. I did. You didn't listen. Before anyone could reply, the trees rang with slow clapping. Out of the darkness stepped a person, his actions mocking and purposeful. The dark robes he wore looked to ripple like fog, and he was towering. A hood partially covered his face, but his eyes shone with evil intent. The figure remarked, "Well done," in a sarcastic, silky voice. You're sharper than I expected, Uzumaki. More figures emerged behind him, all wearing dark armor and brandishing their weapons. They surrounded the Konoha team by spreading out. The group's leader moved forward and fixed Naruto with his gaze. You've made this easy for us. I didn't think you'd bring the vessel right to our doorstep. Shikamaru's gaze grew wide. Vessel? What are you talking about? The man gave a gloomy laugh. The boy carries within him the power to awaken our master. His blood, his chakra. They're the key to breaking the seal. As Sasuke moved ahead of the group, his Sharingan came into play. You won't lay a hand on him. The leader grinned. His eyes lingered on Sakura, Hinata, and Ino, his face contorted with resentment. Oh, I'm not here to fight you, Uchiha. My men will handle that. As for you 3 lovely ladies, perhaps we'll have some fun after we're done. Sakura's fists clenched. Try it, and I'll make you regret ever being born. With her palm on her kunai, Ino's gaze narrowed. You're disgusting. Notwithstanding their threats, the leader chuckled. He held up his hand, indicating his soldiers to charge, saying, bold words. Let's see if you can back them up. Chaos broke out in the clearing. With smooth and accurate moves, Sasuke and Sakura charged into combat. With precision accuracy, Hinata struck down adversaries as she ignited her Byakugan. Shikamaru swiftly located a secure location for Aya before entering the battle, immobilizing several opponents at once with his shadow possession jutsu. Ino remained beside Naruto, her gaze flitting between the fight and him. She added, Naruto, with urgency, we need you. But Naruto remained motionless. His eyes were gloomy and his hands were clasped at his sides as he remained still. Ino sensed that something was off, that a tempest was building behind his placid veneer. She said, come on, Naruto, while shaking his arm. Snap out of it. But he said nothing, his eyes averted. The boss grinned menacingly as he observed him. He leaned forward and said, what's the matter, boy? Frozen in fear? Or perhaps, in a whisper. You're beginning to understand. You feel it, don't you? The power within you. It's calling out to him. Naruto's nails dug into his palms as his fists clenched. With her heart racing, Ino looked at him. Naruto, whatever's going on, we'll face it together, but right now, we need you. Naruto remained silent. He saw his pals fight, risking all to keep each other safe, but he sensed a dark presence tearing at the borders of his awareness, a tremendous weight bearing down on him. The leader's gaze remained fixed on Naruto throughout the conflict. The struggle, the uncertainty, the fear, he could see it, and he was aware that the boy will shatter soon. While the combat continued, Naruto remained still, his thoughts acting as its own battlefield. The sounds of clashing steel and chakra explosions filled the air as the combat continued in the thick forest clearing. Despite being outnumbered, the Konoha team was constantly on high alert due to the fierce fighting of the enemy forces. With their lives on the line, each shinobi was enmeshed in a terrible battle. Sakura dodged a swinging blade and struck her opponent with a bone-crushing uppercut, her fists glimmering with energy. His quickness was uncanny, and he stumbled back but got back up fast. A different opponent rushed in as she was about to attack again, his palm slapping her chest in a hideous act of bravado. Sakura screamed, "You filthy creep," as her fist slammed thunderously into his face. Blood spurted from the man's broken nose as he fell backward, yet he was able to roll to his feet while maintaining a twisted smile. Sakura's eyes were burning with rage as she gazed at him. "Disgusting vermin. You'll regret that." In another scene, Sasuke faced a fierce foe, his Rinnegan and Sharingan blazing as he repelled every move the attacker made. Sasuke maintained his composure, his moves flowing and deliberate, but his opponent was quick, his blows accurate and unrelenting. Sasuke said, "You're good," in a calm, low voice, "but not good enough." The opponent grinned, a spooky light glinting in his own eyes. "Let's see if you can keep up, Uchiha." Meanwhile, Hinata was encircled by several enemies. With her Byakugan engaged, she moved gracefully and precisely, striking important chakra points with her blows. The adversaries constantly pressed her despite her skill, and their synchronization made it hard for her to have the upper hand. She said, "They're stronger than I expected," her forehead pinched in focus. With a quick palm punch, she knocked her assailant tumbling after deflecting a sword that was aiming at her side. "I have to hold them off." Shikamaru had placed Aya behind an improvised barrier of fallen logs, his attention divided between defending her and fighting the adversaries. His shadows bound numerous enemies in place as they slithered over the battlefield. He murmured, "This is such a drag," his normally composed manner straining under the strain. "Why do these things always happen when I'm around?" Ino and Shikamaru stood side by side, with Ino's chakra-infused kunai blocking oncoming blows. She turned to look at Naruto, who was still standing at the edge of the clearing, mute and motionless. Ino said, "There's something wrong," in a tense voice. "Naruto, you've been watching long enough. We need you out here." Naruto stared at the horizon without replying. His body was relaxed and his arms hung easily at his sides, but there was a profound focus in his eyes. He seemed to be waiting for someone or anything. A slow, purposeful clap suddenly reverberated through the confusion. Everyone's attention was captured by the sound that pierced the battle. The enemy leader stepped forward, his presence imposing and uncompromising, emerging from the shadows. He had a tall, muscular, lean build, and a dark cowl that partially covered his face. However, a cold, evil light burned in his eyes. "Impressive," the leader stated in a confident, silky voice. "You've managed to hold your ground against my men longer than I expected." As they gathered, the Konoha shinobi narrowed their eyes to evaluate this new danger. However, the leader's attention was drawn to Naruto. "Ah," murmured the leader, looking at the blonde shinobi. "Naruto Uzumaki. The hero of the Fourth Great Ninja War. Or should I say, the vessel of our salvation?" At last, Naruto's gaze changed and fixed itself on the leader. Although he maintained an appearance of indifference, the tension in the air was evident. Naruto responded, "I don't know who you are," in a calm, low voice, "and I don't care. Whatever game you're playing, it ends here." A low, eerie chuckle came from the leader. "Such arrogance. But then, that's to be expected from someone of your stature. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Malric, the one destined to liberate this land from its false peace. And you, Uzumaki, are the key to that liberation." Naruto's forehead wrinkled a little. "You're wasting your time. I'm not interested in your delusions of grandeur." Malric's eyes gleamed with dark enjoyment, and his smile grew. "Ah, but you see, this isn't about what you want. It's about destiny. Within you lies the power to awaken the Headless Rider, the ancient warrior who will bring true balance to this world." A slight smirk formed on Naruto's lips. "Destiny, huh? I've heard that one before. And every time, it ends the same way. With people like you lying in the dirt. Malric's voice stayed steady, but his face clouded. You mock what you do not understand. The rider is more than a mere legend. He is the embodiment of power, of fear. And once he is freed, no force on this earth will be able to stop him. Naruto stepped forward, his eyes unblinking. You think awakening some ancient monster is going to change anything? All you're doing is setting yourself up for failure. The battlefield was now dominated by the two men, who were only a few feet apart. As both supporters and adversaries focused on the standoff, the violence had halted around them. When Malric continued, "You and I are alike, Uzumaki," his voice dipped to a whisper. "We've both been shaped by pain, by loss. But where you cling to the past, I embrace the future. Together, we could reshape this world." Naruto's eyes became stony. "I don't need someone like you to tell me who I am. If you think you can manipulate me, you're even dumber than you look." Malric smiled again, but this time it was icier. He leaned in a little and said, "You're brave, I'll give you that. But bravery alone won't save you." His voice was a lethal whisper. "When the time comes, you'll have to choose. Embrace your destiny, or be consumed by it." Naruto did not recoil. "The only thing I'm going to embrace is the end of this conversation." There was an electric tension between them, a clash of wills that promised to be a conflict unlike any they had ever encountered. With their eyes locked in a silent challenge, neither man moved. It was more than just a brawl. It was the start of a conflict that would determine the course of history. Malric and Naruto were both aware of it. For Naruto, the world had shrunk to the man in front of him as the conflict raged on all around them. Malric, the mysterious commander of the enemy army, was a silent threat. Every action and breath he took appeared planned and purposeful, a predator assessing his victim. A smirk tugged at Naruto's lips as he cracked his knuckles. "Ready to lose?" Malric gave a gloomy laugh. "Confidence is a double-edged sword, Uzumaki. Let's see how sharp yours is." Unexpectedly, Naruto surged forward, a hard blow aimed at Malric, his fist trailing chakra. With a smooth sidestep, the enemy leader launched a quick counterattack. In his hand, a shining blade appeared and sliced toward Naruto's middle. After barely escaping the blow, Naruto spun away and kicked Malric in the head with a spinning motion. When the impact made contact, Malric skidded back a few steps. The man didn't hesitate, though. Rather, his smile remained unwavering as he stood tall. "Impressive," Malric remarked, dabbing off a smudge of blood from his mouth's corner. "You live up to your reputation." Naruto remained silent. His hands made a quick succession of seals, and suddenly there were several shadow clones all around Malric. Naruto blasted. Attack pattern beta. The clones attacked from every side, moving in perfect unison. Malric's blade spun through the air, precisely deflecting strikes. Steel and chakra-infused kunai clashed, sending sparks flying. However, despite Malric slicing through clone after clone, Naruto himself sprang in, the confusion concealing his true form. "Got you." Naruto snarled as he sped a Rasengan in Malric's direction. Malric, however, was prepared. A strange, dark force glowed in his hand as he turned around in a swirl of speed. The whirling chakra ground against his palm as he struck the Rasengan squarely in the face. Beneath them, the ground fractured and cracked, but Malric held fast, his strength astounding. Malric remarked, "You'll have to do better than that," and he pushed Naruto back with a strong energy burst. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he landed effortlessly. "So, you've got some tricks up your sleeve. Let's see how you handle this." Naruto inhaled deeply and called forth the tailed beast's inner might. Around him, chakra erupted into the well-known golden cloak of Kurama mode. In an instant, his strength and speed increased. Malric's eyes were bright with curiosity. "Ah, the power of the nine tails. Now we're getting serious." In an instant, Naruto disappeared and reappeared behind Malric. He struck out like a bullet with his fist, which was now covered in tailed beast chakra. Malric barely succeeded in blocking, his sword taking the blow but breaking under the strain. "You're fast," Malric said calmly in spite of the fight's intensity. "But speed alone won't save you." The ground underneath Naruto erupted in a flood of dark flames as Malric wove in a series of hand seals. Malric was waiting for Naruto when he leapt into the air, dodging the flames. "Shadow Severance!" Malric cried out, slicing his mended blade into the air. When a surge of evil energy came at Naruto, he had to cross his arms in defense. He was hurled backward by the blast, colliding with a tree with enough force to split its trunk. With a grunt, Naruto raised himself. "All right, no more playing around." He created the Rasenshuriken, a bigger and more powerful Rasengan. He threw it toward Malric, and the buzzing sound filled the air. Malric's gaze grew strained. With a clap of his hands, he conjured a wall of whirling darkness. A thunderous explosion shook the entire woodland when the Rasenshuriken struck the barrier. The battleground was obscured by the airborne smoke and debris. Everything was silent for a while. Then Malric came out, his cloak charred but otherwise intact, since the dust had settled. "Impressive," Malric murmured, admiration in his voice, "but you rely too much on raw power." Sweat trickled down Naruto's brow as he clenched his hands, "And you talk too much." His motions were a blur as he charged forward once more. However, Malric kept up with him this time. They clashed in a flurry of chakra, knives, and fists. Every blow was accurate, every counter well planned. Naruto was caught off guard when Malric abruptly feinted to the left. After finding its target, his blade cut through Naruto's cloak, leaving a small cut on his side. Naruto jumped back to get more distance while hissing in agony, "Damn it." Malric grinned broadly. "Feeling it now, aren't you? This is the difference between us. You fight with emotion, with impulse. I fight with purpose." Gritting his teeth, Naruto created another Rasengan. However, the chakra escaped his control as he attempted to shape it into the more skilled Rasenshuriken. His eyes became wide with surprise. "What the?" He made another attempt, but the outcome remained the same. There would be no Rasenshuriken formation. He sensed his chakra out of time, as though something was preventing him from being in control. Malric saw Naruto's struggle and laughed. "Having trouble? My techniques do more than attack, they disrupt. Your connection to the tailed beasts is faltering, isn't it?" Naruto's thoughts whirled. "Interrupt? How can that be?" Malric left him with no time to reflect. His blade flashed as he pushed forward. Though it was slower than previously, Naruto ducked. Malric pushed forward, his blows unrelenting. Malric teasingly said, "You've relied on your power for so long," in a chilly tone. "But now that it's slipping away, what will you do?" Naruto's body ached from the prolonged fight, and he panted. Although he still had a lot of chakra left over, his control felt inconsistent. He urgently needed a new plan. Malric lifted his sword and aimed it toward Naruto. "This is where you fall, hero." Despite the obstacles, Naruto forced himself to stand tall by clenching his fists. "Not today," he blusterily said. But doubt started to seep into his heart. "Am I capable of defeating him in this manner?" Although the battle was far from done, Naruto felt the pressure of real effort for the first time in a long time. The sounds of clashing steel and the shouts of battle filled the air as the battlefield was in disarray. With his golden chakra cloak sputtering and flickering before completely disappearing, Naruto stood in the middle of it all. Sweat trickled down his face and he was breathing heavily. His dominant form went back to being himself. Feeling the loss of Kurama's strength, he balled his fists. "What's going on? Kurama! What's going on?" he cried out in his mindscape. The enormous nine-tailed fox materialized, towering over him. There was worry in Kurama's eyes. "I don't know, Naruto. Something's wrong. There's a disturbance in your chakra flow." Naruto scowled. "Disturbance? What kind of disturbance?" Kurama's eyes become stony. "It's as if your negative emotions, the darkness you buried long ago, are resurfacing. The hatred, the loneliness. Everything you endured when the village shunned you, when Sasuke betrayed you, when Sakura used your feelings for her to chase after him, it's all coming back." Naruto's gaze expanded. "But I've moved past all that. I've made peace with my past." Kurama gave a headshake. "Have you? Or have you simply buried it, pretending it doesn't exist? That darkness has always been a part of you, Naruto. But now, it's interfering with your connection to me. Light and darkness cannot coexist, and until you confront that truth, my power will remain beyond your reach." Naruto stood silently, his thoughts whirling. Kurama felt the pressure of what he had spoken. Malric's derisive laughter reverberated throughout the battlefield back in the real world. "Look at you, Uzumaki. Stripped of your power, reduced to nothing. How does it feel to be weak again?" Naruto clenched his jaw and shook his fists. He sensed that his allies were watching him. The normally self-assured Ino yelled, "Naruto-kun. Please, get up." Sasuke, engaged in a combative battle with one of Malric's senior lieutenants, glanced anxiously at Naruto. "Damn it, Naruto. Don't fall now." Always the thinker, Shikamaru mumbled to himself, "This is bad. If Naruto can't fight, we're in deeper trouble than I thought." Malric lifted his weapon, a spear of dark menace that throbbed with sinister energy. It's over, Naruto. Once I pierce your heart, the last of your defiance will fade. Naruto's bangs cast a shadow over his eyes as his head slumped low. The memories of his traumatic background, the expectations of others around him, and the weight of his mistakes all came crashing down on him at once. However, one thought broke through the emotional storm. I'm not afraid. His eyes blazed with new resolve as he raised his head. His voice was firm as he asked, "You think I'm scared of losing? You think I'm scared of pain? You don't understand me at all?" With his spear still up, Malric hesitated. Brave words for a man on the brink of defeat. Naruto inhaled deeply. You don't get it. I've already lost everything before. I've faced darkness worse than you can imagine, and I'm still standing. So no, I'm not afraid of you. Because no matter how many times I fall, I'll always get back up. The first time Malric's smile wavered. Interesting. But words alone won't save you. With his spear pointed straight at Naruto's heart, he lunged. As the lethal weapon got closer, the world appeared to slow down. However, something remarkable occurred in the final moment before contact. Ancient Uzumaki seals were engraved on the golden chains that sprung from Naruto's back. With lightning-fast movements, they caught Malric's spear and encircled it, stopping its momentum. What? Malric exclaimed as the spear cracked and its black energy was depleted by the tightening cords. The chains glowed a strong, golden light as Naruto stood erect. You're not the only one who's been hiding their true power. With a growl, Malric withdrew and called forth a surge of sinister energy to liberate himself. However, the attack was easily absorbed by the chains, which made their glow even brighter. Ino's mouth fell open. Those are Uzumaki sealing chains. Naruto-kun had this kind of power all along? Sasuke narrowed his gaze, briefly taking his mind off his own fight. So he's been training in secret. Typical Naruto. Sakura's eyes were full of wonder as she clenched her fists. That's incredible. Naruto, you're amazing. Shikamaru whistled softly. Well, I'll be damned. He really does keep surprising us. With each order, the chains obeyed Naruto's flexed hands. They swung out, slamming hard and accurately at Malric, pushing him away. Malric was defensive for the first time, his normally composed demeanor faltering. Naruto stated, "You underestimated me," in a firm voice, "and that's your biggest mistake." With a wounded sense of pride, Malric frowned. "You think this changes anything? I'll crush you." He launched a flurry of strong blows, but Naruto's chains acted as live shields, deflecting and retaliating against each blow. Malric was pinned in place as the shackles encircled him in a single, quick motion. With fiery eyes, Naruto took a step forward. This is the power of the Uzumaki. And this is just the beginning. Malric was clearly frustrated as he fought against the chains. You think you've won? Naruto grinned. No, the real fight starts now. The chains tightened with a strong push, bringing Malric to his knees. Naruto knew this was far from over, though, even as the opposing leader stared up at him. The stakes had never been higher, and this was just the start of their real fight. Malric was surrounded by a web of luminous light as the golden Uzumaki chains slithered over the battlefield, crackling with power. With his hands out, Naruto stood resolutely, controlling the chains with force and accuracy. Every action was planned and purposeful. This was a tactician, a fighter who had refined his craft through innumerable encounters, not the heedless brawler Malric had anticipated. Malric's biceps bulged as he battled to release himself from the restraints. The bright light of the Uzumaki seals battled furiously with the black energy that surged about him. In his irate voice, he snarled, "These chains. They're suppressing my chakra." Naruto grinned, his gaze unblinking and icy. "That's the point. You think your power gives you the right to terrorize people, but you're about to learn what it means to be truly powerless." Naruto jerked one of the shackles in the direction of Malric's chest. The Dark Commander skidded back across the battlefield as it struck with the fury of a battering ram. Before Malric could even recover, another chain swung out, wrapped itself around his arm, and pulled him forward. Naruto refused to back down. The chains moved in perfect unison as he dragged Malric into a barrage of assaults. Malric was knocked to his knees by one chain that smacked into his ribs and another that hit his legs. His throat was encircled by a third chain, which tightened just enough to briefly stop his airflow before letting go. As the two fighters engaged in combat, the battlefield appeared to blur. With deadly accuracy, Malric directed waves of evil energy into the air. However, the chains formed a barrier that absorbed the assaults, moving like extensions of Naruto's will. Naruto's increasing power was reflected in the Uzumaki seal's golden glow, which pulsed brighter with each blow. Malric raised his spear again, directing a flood of focused darkness into his constricted eyes. He threw the spear with all of his strength, slicing through the air like a black comet, saying, "You're strong, Uzumaki, but you're not invincible." In a second, Naruto's chains responded, enclosing him in a protective dome. When the smoke cleared, Naruto was unharmed despite the spear striking the barrier and exploding in a burst of dark energy. He grinned as he loosened the chains a little. "Is that all you've got?" Malric became really irritated. Calling forth twin blades of pure shadow, he raced forward. As he got closer to them, the ground beneath him shattered with every step. He made a lethal arc with the blades, but Naruto's chains stopped him, encircling the weapons and yanking them out of Malric's grasp. Naruto bridged the gap before Malric could respond, punching Malric in the jaw with a hard blow while his fist glowed with chakra. The battlefield was rocked by the impact, and Malric stumbled backwards while spitting blood. Malric said, "You're starting to piss me off." As he held out his palm, enormous spikes of shadow sprang upward, seeking to impale Naruto, and the ground underneath them erupted. However, Naruto was already moving. He was raised into the air by the chains, which made it easy for him to avoid the lethal spikes. He hurled a volley of chains infused with Rasengan from overhead, each one striking Malric with terrible force. With every impact, the ground trembled, and the Dark Commander fell to his knees again. Naruto whispered, "You're not getting back up," in a low, menacing voice. With both hands outstretched, Malric was lifted off the ground as the chains tightened around him. For a brief moment, it appeared as though Naruto had finally defeated his adversary as the golden light became stronger. Malric's harsh, derisive laughter pierced the atmosphere. "You think you've won, boy? You're nothing but a child playing with power you barely understand." Malric roared, releasing a surge of evil force that broke the bonds encircling him. Naruto was thrown backward by the blast's ferocity, but he landed elegantly, his chains rapidly reorganizing about him. The tension between the two warriors was evident as they stood facing one another. Naruto's resolve was unwavering despite his labored breathing. The chains reacted as he tightened his hold, their golden glow shimmering with fresh vigor. Malric called forth his spear again, and his eyes blazed with evil intentness. "You're strong, Uzumaki. But strength alone won't save you from what's coming." Naruto's eyes narrowed. "I'm not afraid of what's coming, bring it on." As their energies clashed in a tempest of light and darkness, the two charged at one another. As they traded strike after blow, the air crackled with energy as their conflict engulfed the battlefield. Naruto appeared to have the advantage for a while. His shackles moved precisely, slamming relentlessly into Malric. The Dark Leader was worn down and brought closer to defeat with each brilliant onslaught. Then, however, things started to change. Malric became more calculating in his maneuvers and more vicious in his attacks. He quickly and viciously countered the chains after adjusting to Naruto's tactics. He started to gain the upper hand gradually but steadily. The weight of the conflict was bearing down on Naruto, and he could feel the strain in his body. Every action he made required more effort than the last, and his chakra supplies were running low. But he was not going to give up. At the height of their struggle, Naruto noticed a strange movement. Ino had been easily lifted off the ground by one of Malric's lieutenants, who had grabbed her by the throat across the battlefield. She struggled in vain, and as she gasped for air, her face turned pale. Naruto's eyes were fixed on her, and time seemed to stop. For an instant, everything else vanished as a chilling fear took hold of his chest. Ino. Despite the bustle and clamor on the battlefield, Naruto felt as though time stood still as he fixed his gaze on Ino. Her feet barely touched the floor as she dangled limply in one of Malric's goons' grasp. She forced a grin, but her face was pale, and her breath came in sharp, painful gasps. Malric replied, "Ah, so this is what it comes down to," in a victorious yet haggard voice. His dark eyes shone with a ruthless joy as he wiped blood from his lips. "You may have the power to defeat me, Uzumaki, but power alone means nothing in this world. This is the world of the wicked, where only those willing to make the ugliest sacrifices can claim victory." With his golden Uzumaki chains fluttering wildly about him, Naruto's fists clenched. As Malric's words pierced his heart, his chest heaved with effort. Malric pointed to Ino, who was still struggling in his subordinate's grasp. "You want to play the hero? Then choose. Defeat me and let her die, or surrender and save her worthless life. Either way, you'll lose." Ino's normally rebellious eyes softened for a minute, and her breath caught. Her voice was hoarse but determined. "Naruto. Don't do it," she pleaded. She forced a little, melancholy grin. Just beat him. Don't worry about me. Thank you, for everything." Her comments caused Naruto's heart to wrench. He felt completely lost for the first time in his life. Although the world had always weighed heavily on him, it now did so with an oppressive heaviness. His instincts begged him to eliminate the menace right now by finishing Malric. However, a deeper, more primordial force prevented him from leaving Ino. This is incorrect. In his head, he heard Kurama's voice, harsh and uncompromising. Naruto, clear your head. She is a single individual. Numerous lives may be saved if she were sacrificed. You've always understood that being a leader requires making difficult decisions. However, Naruto shook his head, his determination growing. No, Kurama, not this time. Kurama snarled. If you let your emotions to rule you, it will be disastrous for all of us. Naruto disregarded him. He looked back to Ino, who was crying now, rather visibly. Her voice broke as she exclaimed, Naruto-kun. Don't do this. I'm not worth it. You're better than this. Naruto, however, had already decided. He released his chains slowly and deliberately, allowing their golden glow to fade into the atmosphere. As Naruto fell to his knees, Malric's eyes widened in surprise and then joy. With his arms outstretched, Naruto gazed up at the stormy sky. The battlefield became uncannily quiet, and the air surrounding him appeared to still. He said, You win, in a firm voice. Do whatever you want with me. Just let her go. The silence was filled with the harsh, desperate screams of Ino. No, Naruto-kun. Stop, please, don't do this. I'm begging you. As Malric took a step forward, his dark aura throbbing with new vitality, his smile widened. Ah, what a sight. The mighty Uzumaki, brought to his knees by love. How poetic. Dark energy glowed at the tip of his spear as he raised it with a wicked smile. Goodbye, Naruto Uzumaki. The spear descended, and a dazzling burst of light and shadow erupted across the battlefield. Naruto was splayed on the ground with blood pooling beneath him as the light faded after the hit sent a shudder across the region. His body was damaged yet alive, and his respiration was feeble. With a vial of Naruto's blood in his hand, Malric stood triumphantly above him. The Dark Leader turned and spoke loudly to his men. It's time. Gather around. At last, Ino was freed from the henchman's grasp and fell to the ground. Crawling toward Naruto, she embraced his bruised figure while tears ran down her cheeks. Whispering, Naruto-kun. Why? Why did you do this? Naruto opened his eyes vague but full of a silent resolve. The reason he whispered, because. You matter to me, I won't lose anyone else. Ino gripped him more tightly and suppressed a sob. You idiot, you selfless, stupid idiot. Malric's men gathered in a circle around them, chanting in an ancient language. A huge, menacing portal emerged in the middle of their formation as the ground shook. With the container of Naruto's blood held high over his head, Malric entered the circle. He declared, with this sacrifice, the darkness shall rise again. There was a deep, suffocating darkness in the air surrounding the battlefield. As the monster form fully emerged from the depths of the portal, it continued to hiss and crackle. With its mane and tail twirling like storm-tossed shadows, the monster perched atop a huge black horse. The rider itself radiated an aura of sheer malevolence from its aged, ragged armor. Its absence, there was nothing where its head should have been, was its most terrifying characteristic. A faint, unsettling glow of dark energy pulsed like a heartbeat from a hollow emptiness. The uncomfortable silence was broken by Shikamaru's voice. His normally composed tone faltered as he said, So that's it. A headless knight. And here I thought things couldn't get worse. Spread out on the blood-stained floor, Naruto could only gaze, his body quivering with anguish and fatigue. As he got closer to the rider, Malric's laughter reverberated. When he exclaimed, At last. The Black Reaper has returned. His voice was full with hyperbolic triumph. Your reign shall begin anew, my lord. Naruto made his arms move while clenching his fists and chewing his teeth. The weight of his wounds pulled him back down after he forced himself up a little. Sweat mixed with the blood on his face as he moaned in frustration. Ino knelt next to him, clutching his shoulders with shaky hands. Her voice broke, Naruto-kun. Stop, she begged. You're in no condition to fight. Please, please don't do this. However, a mixture of rage and powerlessness flared in Naruto's eyes. He mumbled, attempting to raise himself once more, I can't just sit here. He swayed dangerously as his vision became blurry. With tears running down her cheeks, Ino squeezed him tighter. You'll die if you keep this up. Let me help you. The enormous black sword in the headless horseman's hand gleamed menacingly as it shifted on its saddle. Despite lacking eyes, it moved with a leisurely, methodical grace, studying the battlefield. As the knight's stare, or whatever dark force directed it, briefly rested on each individual, the tension was evident. The knight appeared to hesitate, its gaze straying to a distant individual. Shikamaru's eyes widened in terror as he followed its line of sight. No. No, not her. The young test subject they had risked everything for was crouched in a corner far across the field, her body shaking violently. Her wild eyes raced about, looking for a way out, but she couldn't find one. Sasuke clutched his sword, breathing heavily and covered in blood. With his Sharingan blazing, he yelled, "It's targeting her." When Naruto realized what was happening, his heart fell. "No," he cried in a raspy voice, straining to stay upright. With its horrifying rider raising its blade high, the horse reared up. The horse then charged without making a sound. As it thundered across the battlefield, a dark blur of doom speeding for its prey, the ground shook beneath its hooves. Shikamaru's hands flew into a well-known seal in a second. Shadow Possession Jutsu. His shadow reached out to the rider, but the knight only used a pulse of its ominous aura to shatter the tendrils. Sakura's hands glowed with chakra as she jumped into action. She made a rift in the earth with her hand, blocking the horse's route. The knight leapt over the barrier with ease and didn't even slow down. "Hinata, now!" screamed Sakura. With the activation of her Byakugan, Hinata blasted the rider with chakra needles. Its armor was hit by the attacks, but they were harmlessly disintegrated. Hinata's hands shook as she gasped, "It's invincible." Sasuke's Mangekyo Sharingan was spinning wildly as he clenched his teeth. He was in the knight's path in a flash, his blade arcing brilliantly. However, Sasuke skidded back as the knight parried with ease. The rider could not be stopped. "Run! Get out of there!" cried Shikamaru as it drew closer to the girl. However, it was too late. The Black Reaper swung its enormous sword in one smooth move. As the girl's headless body collapsed to the ground, the battlefield grew quiet. Her dead eyes stared into space as her head rolled a few feet away. The group let out a collective gasp. Shikamaru's shadow faded and flickered as he sank to his knees. His voice cracked as he murmured, "No. No, 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 we failed her." Sasuke lost his grip on his sword and stumbled back. Bile rose in his throat as he gripped his gut. His voice hardly raised above a whisper, This can't be real," he whispered. Sakura fell to Naruto's side, trembling as she attempted to bandage his injuries. Tears were running down her cheeks, and her face looked pallid. How could this happen? As she collapsed to the ground, Hinata put her hands over her mouth, deactivating her Byakugan. "We couldn't save her." Dismounting, the Black Reaper's horse vanished into the darkness. Dark energy swirled around it as it slammed its blade into the earth next to the girl's severed skull. Then it secured the gory trophy by lifting the head and the blade with a terrible tug. With a hideous smile on his face, Malrik slapped his hands together. "Magnificent, my lord, you have made your first mark on this world once more." As Naruto attempted to stand up again, his vision swam, and he fell into Ino's embrace. Her sobs racked her body as she hugged him tight, scarcely perceptible. Whispering, "Naruto-kun. I'm so sorry," she said. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't been so weak." With all of his strength expended, Naruto's head lolled to the side. The last sound he heard was Ino's agonized scream as darkness enveloped him. The silence was broken by Sakura's voice, which was shaking with urgency. "We need to get Naruto to the hospital now, or you won't make it." Shikamaru was able to nod while still on his knees. "We'll take him back, but this fight isn't over. Not by a long shot." At last, with a strained and pallid face, Sasuke found his voice. "We'll regroup. But first, let's get him out of here." Ino's tears seeped into Naruto's blood-stained clothing as she held him close. She closed her eyes, regret racing through her head. "I am solely responsible for this." The return trip to Konoha had been a haze of tears, blood, and despair. The medics hurried Naruto into the hospital while he lay unconscious on the stretcher, his face haggard and pale. With each member absorbed by their own spiraling thoughts of loss and failure, the team barely managed to stay together. Tsunade operated in the operation room with hurry and accuracy. As she sutured the deep wound in Naruto's abdomen, her hands radiated a steady green energy. His condition was grave despite her best efforts, and the bleeding had been unrelenting. She finally stopped the bleeding and closed the incision after what seemed like hours. Her brow furrowed, she took a step back. She told Shizune, who was standing next to her, "His injuries are stabilized, but he's lost too much blood." With a worried expression on her face, Shizune nodded. What's his blood type? Grimly, type AB negative, Tsunade answered. Extremely rare. There's no one in the village who matches it. Shizune's gaze expanded. Then what do we do? Tsunade wiped the perspiration from her forehead and sighed deeply. He'll need a blood substitute to survive, along with a carefully managed diet of iron-rich and nutrient-dense foods. It's not ideal, but it's all we can do for now. With a tired but determined expression, she took off her gloves and walked out of the operating room. A haze of golden hair greeted her as she entered the corridor. Tsunade remarked, Ino, in a forceful yet kind voice. With panicked eyes, Ino seized her arms. Tsunade-sama. How is he? Is he going to be okay? Please tell me he's okay. Tsunade steadied Ino by placing her hands on her shoulders. Calm down, Ino. He's alive. The wound is closed, and the bleeding has stopped. Ino felt instant comfort, but it was fleeting. But, there's something else, isn't there? Tsunade gave a nod. He's extremely weak. Naruto lost a significant amount of blood, and his blood type is so rare that we don't have any matching donors. Ino gasped for air. What does that mean? What can we do? We'll have to compensate through other means, Tsunade clarified. A specific diet and careful monitoring. He'll recover, but it's going to take time. For now, he's stable, but he needs rest. Ino's hands were shaking as she bit her lip. I see. Tsunade squeezed her comfortingly. She left Ino standing in the hallway, her heart heavy with sorrow and remorse, saying, He's strong, Ino. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. But right now, he needs you to be strong for him. Ino walked into the darkened hospital room. The only sound was the heart monitor's steady beep, which served as a continual reminder of Naruto's precarious condition. His chest rose and fell shallowly as he lay still on the bed. He had an IV drip on his arm and an oxygen mask over his face. Her chest tightened uncomfortably at the sight of him like this, so still and defenseless. Her legs felt like lead as she walked slowly toward the bed. She took his hand in hers while sitting on the side of the bed, her fingertips gliding over his rough skin. Naruto-kun, you idiot. Why did you do it? Why did you risk everything for me? She said, her eyes welling with tears. She buried her face in his hand, her shoulders trembling with silent sobbing, and her voice cracked. If I wasn't so weak, none of this would have happened. You wouldn't be lying here, barely hanging on. Hours passed while she remained by his side, consumed by her grief and guilt. Finally, fatigue started to wear you down. She leaned against him, shifting slightly, but her bra was tight and painful. She sighed in frustration and went under her shirt to unhook it, removing the garment covertly. She tossed it aside and sat down again, putting her head softly on his shoulder. I'm so sorry, Naruto-kun, she muttered as she closed her eyes to fall asleep. Meanwhile, there was tension in Tsunade's office. Tsunade listened to Shikamaru's account while sitting behind her desk with a somber expression. Kakashi was standing close by, his face impassive, his arms folded. Despite his overwhelming sense of remorse, Shikamaru spoke quietly and steadily as he described the mission's events in detail. He explained the Headless Horseman's appearance, the portal, and the girl's untimely demise. Tsunade's hands were steepled as she sat back in her chair. Silently, she stated, So, this is the threat we're facing now, a monster born of darkness, capable of cutting through our strongest defenses. Kakashi let out a sigh, and Naruto, he put himself in harm's way to save Ino. Shikamaru gave a nod. He knew the risks, but he didn't hesitate. Even when the odds were against him, he stood his ground. A little smile curved Tsunade's lips. That's Naruto for you. Always willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of others. Kakashi's gaze grew softer. It seems he's found someone worth fighting for. He may not realize it yet, but his actions speak volumes. But Shikamaru tightened his fists and glanced down. He said, We failed, with a sour tone. We promised to protect her, and we couldn't. She trusted us, and we let her down. Tsunade's face became stern. You did what you could, Shikamaru. Sometimes, even our best efforts aren't enough. But we learn, and we move forward. Shikamaru gave a grudging nod. Before she died, the girl mentioned something, he stated. She said her grandfather warned her about the Headless Horseman. That he seeks vengeance and won't stop until he reclaims his head. Tsunade squinted her eyes. She said, So, that's the missing piece. We need to find out more about this creature's origins and how to stop it. Shikamaru got up. I'll start gathering information immediately. We can't let this happen again. Tsunade gave a nod. Good. And Shikamaru, he stopped and turned to face her again. The words, "Don't carry this burden alone," she added quietly. "We're all in this together." With a little nod, Shikamaru walked out of the room, still feeling the burden of their failure. Kakashi let out a sigh and looked away. "We've faced countless threats before, but this feels different." With her hands interlocked, Tsunade leaned forward. "We'll face it together, but for now, let's focus on Naruto's recovery. He's the key to our survival." It grew darker back in the hospital room. Ino's eyelids fluttered wide as she awoke. She glanced at Naruto, who had a calm expression on his face despite everything they had been through. Her heart hurting, she stroked a lock of hair away from his forehead. Whispering, "I promise, Naruto-kun," she said, "I'll become stronger, for you." There was still no sound in the room, but her eyes blazed with resolve. With his body hurting from the battle that had almost cost him everything, Naruto woke up in his slumber. Fragmented recollections of suffering, grief, and an odd warmth that now hovered next to him weighed heavily on his mind. Something warm and soft pushed against him when he moved a little. His eyes flickered open slowly as his respiration accelerated. He awoke to the hospital's clean white ceiling and momentarily wondered where he was. But his chest constricted as the mission's events flooded back. Instinctively, his hand moved and brushed against something outside the hospital bed. Something smooth and velvety. Slowly, Naruto's head twisted, revealing a waterfall of blonde hair. Splayed across the pillow, it shimmered softly in the low light. When he recognized the person, his heart skipped a beat. "Ino," he whispered. Her face was serene but stained with dried tears as she lay curled up next to him. Her brows were knotted together even when she slept, as though she were caught in a bad dream. Naruto felt his heart tighten. Compared to the furious and self-assured Ino he was accustomed to seeing, her fragility was striking. With hesitation, he reached out and brushed a stray hair out of her face. His stomach turned over with shame at the sight of her sobbing. All of a sudden, Ino moved. Her eyes sprung wide, and she appeared momentarily confused. Her eyes immediately filled with new tears as she fixed them on Naruto's. "Naruto," she exclaimed, encircling him with her arms and holding on to him firmly. "You idiot, you stupid, stupid idiot," she wailed, her voice breaking. Naruto's body was still bruised and weak, and he grimaced at the unexpected embrace. He did not, however, push her away. Rather, he led her to sob against his chest, causing them both to be shaken. He started, "Ino," but his voice was raspy, hardly audible above a whisper. She yelled, "You could have died," while her voice was muffled by his hospital robe. "Do you have any idea how scared I was? How much it hurt to see you like that?" Naruto kept his eyes downcast and said nothing. He was at a loss for words. He felt a great deal of pressure from their failure, the girl's passing, and his own powerlessness. Anger and pain filled Ino's tear-streaked face as she drew back a little. "Why? Why did you do it? Why did you risk everything for me?" Naruto swallowed hard as he searched for the right words. "Because, if something had happened to you, I wouldn't have been able to forgive myself." Ino's eyes became wide with surprise. Her hold on him relaxed a bit, and she gazed at him, looking for any hint of reluctance or uncertainty on his face. An emotion that Naruto couldn't quite understand flashed in his eyes. "I didn't think. I care about you, Ino." His eyes widened in horror as the words escaped his lips before he could stop them. His face flushed red as he slapped a hand over his mouth. A tiny, kind grin appeared on Ino's lips despite her cheeks turning a deep scarlet. She took his hand and softly pressed it on her chest, right above her heart. With a murmur, "Thank you, Naruto-kun," she said. The sensation of her warm skin beneath his palm and the rhythmic pounding of her heart made Naruto's heart race. He attempted to remove his hand as his face heated up even more, but Ino kept it tightly. The room's door sprang open before he could speak, and Tsunade entered. Taking at the scene before her, she froze in the doorway. She raised an eyebrow in response. Well, she murmured. "I didn't realize the two of you were this close." As he fumbled to explain, Naruto's cheeks flushed deeply. "It's not what it looks like, Tsunade-bachan." But Ino just grinned and let go of his hand. "Good morning, Tsunade-sama." Tsunade crossed her arms and laughed. "How are you feeling, Naruto?" Naruto tested his limbs by shifting uneasily. "I've been better," said him. His body resisted his attempt to sit up, and he groaned in frustration and fell back onto the cushion. Tsunade's face softened as she walked over to the bed. "You're not fully healed yet. Take it easy." With a gentle touch on his shoulder, Ino helped him back down. "Listen to her, Naruto-kun. You're not going anywhere until you've recovered." With a clenched fist, Naruto showed his frustration. The words, "I hate this," he whispered. "I hate feeling weak and useless." Understanding softened Ino's gaze. She bent over him and kissed him tenderly. Naruto didn't back down even though his eyes widened in shock. Ino whispered, "It's okay to feel that way, we all feel like that sometimes. But you're not alone, Naruto. We're in this together." Her lips lingered a bit longer as she gave him another kiss. She smiled teasingly at him as she withdrew. "Oh, by the way, I wasn't wearing a bra earlier." After blinking in bewilderment, Naruto's eyes landed on the abandoned garment on the ground. An intense flush came over his cheeks. What? Ino laughed, obviously taking pleasure in his response. Her voice was a teasing whisper as she leaned close. "Don't worry, it's our little secret." Tsunade gave an eye roll. "I'm still here, you know." Unfazed, Ino smiled. "I don't care." Naruto covered his face with his fists and moaned. A tiny smile pulled at his lips in spite of the discomfort. The burden of their recent experience appeared to be somewhat lessened for a brief while. Ino remarked, "I'll go get you some food," as she stood up and stretched. She gave him a loving grin as she looked back at him. "You need to eat if you're going to get your strength back." As she walked out of the room, Naruto observed her with a somewhat lighter heart. Tsunade smirked and crossed her arms. "You're lucky to have her, Naruto. Don't mess it up." Naruto leaned back against the cushion and sighed deeply. "Yeah," he muttered, "I know." Ino reflected on everything that had transpired as she strolled through the busy marketplace. Her heart was both heavy and yet full. Her thoughts were racing when she stopped in front of a food stand. Then she whispered to herself, "What should I get for Naruto-kun?" Sitting by himself on the hospital bed, Naruto's hands were clenched, the pressure turning his knuckles white. The fury erupting within him muffled out the faint voices from the hallway, the distant sound of medical equipment, and the sterile smell of the room. A single thought filled his mind: he had lost. He grunted, "This is humiliating," as he spoke. As he punched the mattress next to him, his voice wavered with annoyance. "I hate this. I hate this feeling of helplessness." He kept thinking about the fight in a painful loop. The young girl's icy, lifeless gaze, the headless horseman's tremendous might, and the eerie sound of the sword meeting flesh. It was all too much. Naruto yelled, "Kurama," in a strained voice. His mind resonated with the Nine-Tails' deep, resonant snarl. "What is it, Naruto?" As Naruto concentrated on the existence of his inner demon, his eyes narrowed. "That thing, the headless horseman. What is it? What does it want?" For a few while, Kurama remained mute, seemingly considering how much to divulge. At last his voice rumbled with a mixture of solemnity and contempt. "He is a remnant of a dark past. A being consumed by vengeance." Naruto scowled. "Vengeance? For what?" Kurama exhaled sharply. "Listen carefully, Naruto. The story of the Headless Horseman is a tale drenched in betrayal and injustice. Long ago, he was a noble warrior, a protector of his people. His name was lost to time, but his deeds were legendary. He was a man of honor, a man of conviction." Kurama's voice grew heavier as the story progressed, but as with many tales of heroes, his story took a dark turn. He was betrayed by those he trusted most, his own comrades. They accused him of treason, of crimes he did not commit. His loyalty was repaid with chains, and his bravery with scorn. As he listened, Naruto's rage simmered and his jaw hardened. Kurama went on, "They sentenced him to death, but not just any death. They beheaded him in front of his people, a spectacle of humiliation and fear. His body was left to rot, but his soul could not rest. The injustice, the betrayal, and the pain bound him to this world." Naruto gulped hard as the story's gravity set him, and now he wants revenge. Kurama said, "Yes, in confirmation." His hatred festered over centuries. His spirit was twisted by the darkness, and he became what you saw, a force of destruction, driven by a singular goal: to make those who wronged him suffer. He will not stop until he claims enough heads to fill the void left by his own. As Naruto took in Kurama's remarks, his palms began to shake. How do we stop something like that? The words, "You must understand him, Naruto," were spoken by Kurama. This isn't just about power. It's about resolving the hatred that binds him. But be warned. His vengeance will not be easily swayed. He sees the living as complicit in his suffering. Leaning back on the bed, Naruto gazed at the ceiling with vacant eyes. He was troubled by the size of the task that lay before. He briefly experienced the crushing weight of duty, which he had always carried with him. He was startled out of his reverie by a gentle knock on the door. Ino entered with a bag of snacks as the door cracked open. When she saw him waking, her expression brightened, but her eyes still had a hint of grief. She held up the bag and said, "Naruto-kun," smiling warmly. "I brought you something. It's grilled chicken, your favorite." With images of the horseman still weighing heavily on his mind, Naruto smiled weakly but remained silent. Ino placed the meal on the little tray table and moved up to the bed. The aroma of freshly cooked chicken and steaming veggies filled the room as she opened the containers. She murmured, "Come on," as she sat next to him. She used chopsticks to pick up a piece of chicken and held it out to him, saying, "You need to eat. Open your mouth." Naruto gave a headshake. "I can feed myself." Ino gave a playful pout. "Nope, I'm feeding you. This is your chance, Naruto-kun. How many guys get to say they were fed by a beautiful girl like me?" Despite his hot cheeks, Naruto opened his mouth grudgingly. Grinning, Ino gave him a cautious taste of chicken. She went on, her tone light and playful, yet there was a trace of melancholy in her upbeat manner. Naruto observed how her hands shook a little while she fed him and how her gaze would occasionally dart to his patched wounds. He could feel the sorrow and remorse she was trying to conceal, despite her bravery. "Ino," he muttered after gulping down another bite. Her smile wavered a little as she turned to face him. "What is it, Naruto-kun?" He responded, "You don't have to pretend," in a gentle yet forceful tone. "I know you're hurting too." For a minute, Ino appeared to be about to crumble as her hands froze. She mustered a smile after taking a big breath, though. She responded, "I'm fine, Naruto-kun," but her tone faltered. I hate seeing you like this, and I hate that I couldn't do more to help." With a steady stare, Naruto stretched out and took her hand gently. His words, "We'll get through this, together." Despite the tears in her eyes, Ino nodded and squeezed his hand. She brushed away her tears and then added, "Anyway, guess what? Tsunade-sama said you can go home today. I got your discharge papers." Astonished, Naruto blinked. "Really? I can leave?" Ino smiled again and nodded. She handed him a cleanly folded blue clothing that she had taken out of another bag, saying, "Yep, but first, you need to get dressed. I picked this out for you. I think it'll look great on you." Naruto smiled slightly as he accepted the clothing. "Thanks, Ino." Ino busied herself cleaning up while he started to change. As she leaned down to retrieve something from the ground, Naruto's gaze inadvertently strayed. He hastily averted his gaze as his face flushed. Ino spotted his agitated look and straightened up. She gave a knowing smirk. "Were you looking, Naruto-kun?" He stammered, his face blazing. "And no." She approached him and gave him a brief peck on the cheek while laughing. "Don't worry," she acknowledged, winking. "You'll get to see plenty more once we're home." For the first time in what seemed like days, Naruto let himself grin as his heart raced. What he needed was Ino's unflinching backing and joyful energy. She said, "Let's go home," and she took his hand. They left the hospital together, prepared to take on any obstacles that might come up. Naruto was leaning on Ino for support, and the sunlight coming through the hospital windows did little to cheer him up. The weight of his recent failure, rather than actual discomfort, made every stride feel heavier than the one before it. The headless horseman's memories persisted, serving as a continual reminder of his loss. As they moved through the hospital hallway, Ino walked next to him, keeping him steady with her arm firmly around his waist. She tried to hide her worry under a cheerful smile, but it was clear. A group of young women congregated as they left the hospital, their enthusiastic talk piercing the cacophony of the busy street. Their eyes widened in wonder and awe as they swiftly surrounded Naruto. With horror in her voice, one of them begged, "Naruto-kun, please, tell us what happened." Another eagerly inquired, "We heard about your battle. Was it really that terrifying?" Naruto averted his face aside as his eyes grew gloomy. He didn't want to explain his defeat to a group of enthusiastic onlookers or relive the fight. Ino intervened right away, her face stiffening. Her tone became sharp and authoritative as she raised her voice. With an angry glare, she said, "Enough, leave Naruto-kun alone." She also added, possessively, "He's with me, so back off." The girls recoiled in surprise at her abrupt change in attitude. Muttering apologies, they scattered, looking curiously at Naruto and Ino as they left. Naruto let out a sigh, clearly annoyed. "I'm not yours, Ino," he said in a cold voice. Ino grinned and leaned closer. "Not yet, but you will be, Naruto-kun." They went silently along the street after he didn't answer. A recognizable person soon emerged, running full speed in their direction. Rock Lee screeched to a stop in front of Naruto, his trademark bowl cut bouncing as he ran. While he dragged Naruto into a bone-crushing embrace, tears ran down his cheeks. Naruto-kun, broke Lee's heart, his voice trembling. I've missed you so much, it's been too long since we last fought together in the war. Naruto winced as he struggled to break free. He snarled, let go, you idiot, you're crushing me. Lee let him go right away while apologizing deeply. He straightened, his face taking on a serious expression. I'm so sorry, Naruto-kun. I was just overwhelmed with emotion. But, I heard about your recent battle. They say the Headless Horseman defeated you in combat. Naruto's fists clenched and his eyes squinted. Lee's remarks were like salt on a wound that was still raw from the humiliation of his defeat. Please, Naruto-kun. Tell me about your fight. I need to learn from your mistakes so I can become stronger. Teach me how you failed so that I may never experience the same, Lee went on, ignoring Naruto's mounting rage. Naruto lost patience. He yelled, get lost, you moron, I'm not in the mood for your nonsense. Ino, who had been silently watching the conversation, burst out laughing. Although she was cautious to avoid his excessively passionate embraces, she found Lee's earnestness charming and funny. Lee's shoulders slumped in defeat as he appeared devastated. I see, I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. He stepped back and bowed respectfully to Naruto before turning to go. If you ever feel like sharing, I'll be ready to listen. Leaning heavily on Ino, Naruto shrugged his eyes and muttered, whatever, before moving on. They almost ran into another well-known face as they rounded the bend. When Hinata Hyuga spotted Naruto, she stood silently, her lavender eyes widening in surprise. Her cheeks were flushed, and she shifted uneasily. Her voice was scarcely audible above a whisper when she said, Naruto-kun, greeting him. Naruto gave her a curious glance. Oh, it's you. Hinata, right? The quiet, weird girl. Hinata blushed more deeply and looked down, her fingers twitching uneasily. She said, I heard about your battle, with hesitation. I'm sorry for your loss. Naruto's face grew serious. Another reminder of his failure was the last thing he needed. Sensing that he was uncomfortable, Hinata reached into her bag and took out a tiny vial that contained a green liquid that was glowing. She said, here, and extended it toward him. This is a special herbal remedy. It might help with your recovery. Ino moved forward, her eyes narrowing, before Naruto could reply. Her tone was courteous but strong, leaving little room for debate. Thanks, Hinata, but Naruto-kun doesn't need that. I'm a medical ninja, and I've got everything under control. After hesitating and letting her hand hover in midair, Hinata carefully pulled it away. I see, she muttered. She turned and left with her head bowed, saying, take care, Naruto-kun. Naruto furrowed his brow as he watched her leave. What's her deal? With a short, nothing to worry about, Ino tightened her hold on his waist. Come on, Naruto-kun. Let's get you home. They arrived at Naruto's residence after what seemed like a lifetime. Ino led him to the couch and helped him inside. With a heavy sigh, he fell into the cushions and closed his eyes in an attempt to unwind. Unpacking the food she had brought, Ino busied herself in the kitchen. Upon her return, she discovered Naruto staring at the TV. War hero Naruto Uzumaki suffers crushing defeat, was the headline seen on the news channel. Exaggeratedly serious, the anchor described Naruto's fight and its conclusion. Anger twisted Naruto's face. Muttering, stupid reporter, he reached for the remote control and turned off the television. When Ino came back, she was wearing shorts and a loose tank top, a light, casual ensemble. She sat next to Naruto and put a hand on his arm, her face softening. Don't let it get to you, Naruto-kun, she whispered softly. People care about you, that's all. You're a hero to them, and they're just worried. Naruto sneered. I don't care about any of that. Ino scowled without raising the matter. Rather, she bent over and planted a gentle, long-lasting kiss on his lips. Naruto's cheeks flushed red as his eyes widened in shock. There was determination in her eyes as she withdrew. Her words, train me, Naruto-kun, were forceful. I don't want to be a burden anymore. Teach me the wind style so I can fight by your side. Naruto paused, surprised at her determination. At last, he gave a nod. All right, he muttered. I'll train you. With a smile, Ino put her arms around him tightly. The softness of her body crushed against him caused Naruto's face to flame, but he didn't back down. Rather, he relaxed and took solace in her warmth. Naruto felt a spark of hope for the first time in days, even though the road ahead was uncertain. They would tackle whatever obstacles were in their way together. A tiny cottage lay beneath the moon's gentle light in a peaceful, remote village tucked away in the middle of the forest. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and the cool air carried the subtle rustle of leaves. The room was filled with the warmth of a blazing fire, which caused the walls to flicker with shadows. The golden light shone on the cheeks of the family as they gathered around the hearth. The father sipped from a mug of warm cider, a rugged man with a worn face. His wife rocked their baby in her arms while humming a sweet melody. She was a kind woman with kind eyes. Their laughing filled the room while their two older children, a girl and a boy, played with wooden toys at their feet. In a world that frequently seemed far too harsh, it was a sight of tranquility and joy. With the exception of the distant howling of wolves and the rare owl's call, the night was quiet outside. A deep, regular thudding that sounded like the beating of a gigantic heart, however, broke the silence. Thud. 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 The father put down his drink and frowned his brow. His voice was low as he questioned, "Did you hear that?" The mother's eyes darted to the window as she stopped humming. She answered, "It's probably just the wind," but her tone showed that she was uncomfortable. Thud. 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 The sound became clearer and louder. It was a loud hoof clatter that reverberated into the darkness. As the noise approached, the family looked at each other anxiously, each beat echoing through the earth below. The boy got to his feet, his eyes glimmering with curiosity. He said, "Is it a horse, Papa?" The father got up from his seat, grabbing reflexively for the axe leaning against the wall. "Stay here," he commanded in a stern tone. He took careful steps toward the door. A spooky silence that appeared to push against the cottage's walls had taken the place of the thudding. After a moment of hesitation, the father put his hand on the latch of the door and pulled it open. There was an eerie silence as the night met him. The woodland was glowing palely in the moonlight, but there was no one on the way to their house. Not a horse. Not a rider. He went outdoors and looked for movement in the shadows. His voice reverberated into the night as he exclaimed, "Who's there?" No answer. The father's hand gripped the axe more tightly. With his heart thumping in his chest, he turned back toward the cottage. The silence was broken by a loud, startling smash as he reached for the door. A huge person on horseback rushed into the cottage, causing the door to crack and explode inside. As it snorted and pawed at the ground, the horse's breath was visible in the chilly air, and its eyes flashed a terrifying red. The rider, wearing dark armor, had an unearthly fear about him. He carried a viciously bent blade in his gauntleted hands that sparkled in the firelight, and his cloak billowed behind him like a gloomy apparition. The rider's head, or rather, the absence of it, was the most horrific of all, though. Dark, swirling mist spilled out of the jagged stump at the end of his neck like a hideous cloud. The family's once comfortable house turned into a terrifying room as they screamed. The headless horseman was quicker than the father, who hurried forward and raised his axe. The father's head was severed from his body as the sword swung through the air with a quick, ruthless blow. The man's lifeless body slumped to the floor, spraying blood across the walls. The mother's screams blended with her children's cries as she held her baby close. "No, please, no," she exclaimed, her eyes welling with tears. With his sword dripping with new blood, the horseman turned to face her. The beast's hoofs stung the wooden floor with sparks as he urged his demonic steed forward. The mother's skull hit the floor with a painful thud as he hushed her with another swing of his blade. Unaware of the chaos surrounding him, the baby cried in her arms. The youngster hurled himself at the creature, his little fists banging against the black armor, before the horseman could raise his sword again. The child yelled, "Leave my family alone," in a terrified and enraged voice. The horseman hesitated, as though he was appreciating the boy's courage, but he was not a merciful person. He swung his blade in one ruthless move, killing the youngster as simply as extinguishing a candle. The girl, who was now the only one left in her family, retreated into a corner and covered her lips with her little hands to stop herself from crying. The gigantic figure dismounted, his boots resonating menacingly on the blood-soaked floor, and her wild eyes mirrored his. She spoke a prayer in a tremulous voice, "Please, don't." With his blade gleaming in the firelight, the headless horseman took a step closer. For a time, the flames appeared to dance in anticipation as he lifted it high. Then the blade dropped. The crackle of the fire and the thin trickle of blood on the floor were the only sounds in the cottage as it grew silent again. With his crimson-sheathed sword, the horseman stood amid the bloodshed. He turned and made his way back to his horse, who was waiting for him calmly at the broken doorway. He mounted the horse with a smooth motion, and the two of them disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the echoes of fear and death. The formerly cozy and energetic cottage has turned into a chilly, dead grave. Long shadows covered the gory scene as the fire burnt low. The forest outside seemed quiet, as though it was lamenting the lives lost. That night would see the development of the Headless Horseman mythology, a story of bloodshed and retribution that would plague the community for many years to come. As Tsunade sat in her office, long shadows were created on her desk by the early morning light that was coming in through the blinds. The air was thick with stress, but the room had a subtle scent of ink and wood polish. The reports were strewn out in front of her as she sat back in her chair and massaged her temples. The same horrific events were described in each. A family was viciously slaughtered, their heads were cut, and they went missing. Tsunade said, "This is madness," her voice scarcely heard above the roaring in her brain. "No, this goes beyond madness. This is a nightmare come to life." With her hands shaking a little, she poured herself a glass of sake and brought it to her lips. She was about to take a sip when the door to her office opened and Kakashi appeared, his normally composed countenance replaced by a somber one. After saying, "Tsunade-sama," he entered and shut the door. "I assume you've heard the news?" Tsunade sighed and put down her drink. She shook her head, her golden hair flowing, and said, "Yes, Kakashi. A whole family, slaughtered in their own home. No heads, no trace of the killer. It's like he vanished into thin air. This is beyond anything we've dealt with before." Kakashi narrowed his eyes as he nodded. "The villagers are terrified. They're locking their doors, refusing to leave their homes after sunset. The fear is spreading fast." The words, "We need to act," Tsunade stated firmly. "We can't let this go on. If this thing keeps up, the entire village will descend into chaos." Kakashi's arms were crossed. "I agree. We need a unified response, not just from Konoha, but from every hidden village. This threat doesn't discriminate. It could strike anywhere, anytime." Slowly, Tsunade nodded while keeping her eyes on the reports. "Call for a cage summit. We'll meet in a week to discuss our next move. If this headless horseman wants to terrorize the world, then the world will stand together against him." Kakashi's head bowed. "Understood. I'll send out the summons immediately." Tsunade reclined back in her chair and let out a long, deep breath as Kakashi turned to go. She murmured, "I'm going to need another drink," and reached for the sake bottle again. Sasuke Uchiha was standing on the roof of a tall structure in another part of the hamlet, looking down at the streets with his dark eyes. There was an uncanny silence in the formerly lively village. People were moving fast, heads down, eyes darting anxiously, as though the horseman would show up at any second. Sasuke said, "So, it's begun," his voice barely heard above the wind. "The horseman has started his rampage." He gripped his sword's hilt more tightly. As he contemplated the consequences, his mind raced. This was about more than one family or village. Fear had already taken hold of the people's hearts, and the horseman's wrath was unending. Sasuke thought, "This is more than just terrifying," and his face was serious. "It's destabilizing everything. Fear is the ultimate weapon, and he wields it masterfully." Naruto stood in his kitchen, making eggs, in a tiny apartment across the hamlet. The air smelled of sizzling butter, but he was not thinking about it. As his mind raced, reliving the previous night's events, his hands moved automatically. The pictures were clear, as though they had been etched into his brain. It was a calm evening as a family gathered around their hearth, laughing. The door then sprang open. The horseman came in, his blade shining as he killed everyone in his path. Screams rang out, blood spattered the walls, and then there was silence. As he switched off the stove, Naruto blinked and shook his hand. Sweat trickled down his brow, and he breathed in short breaths. He collapsed on the couch as he stumbled to the living room. There was a lingering feeling of dread as the vision faded and his body trembled. At that moment, Ino emerged from the bathroom, her hair still wet from the shower. She was wearing a loose-fitting top that showed a little bit of her neckline and clung to her. With a towel thrown over her shoulders, she approached Naruto with little apparent regard for how she looked. "Naruto-kun," she remarked in a quiet but worried tone, "what's wrong?" Naruto sat up taller and wiped his face hurriedly. He murmured, "Nothing," avoiding her eyes. Ino narrowed her eyes and scowled. She moved closer, placing her hands on her hips as she stood in front of him, saying, "Don't give me that. I've known you long enough to tell when something's eating at you. You've been distant all morning. You're in your own world, and it's scaring me." Naruto looked at her, weariness weighing heavily in his eyes. "It's nothing, Ino. Just drop it." An uncommon seriousness replaced Ino's typical cheerful manner, hardening her countenance. Her voice faltered a little as she went on, "No, Naruto. I won't just drop it. I'm not like everyone else. I'm not going to pretend I don't see what's happening to you. I'm your future wife. I have a right to know when something's wrong. With a groan, Naruto combed through his untidy hair. In a low voice, he continued, I'll tell you when the time is right, but for now, just trust me. Ino's displeasure was visible as she tightened her hands. She wanted to protest and ask questions, but she could see how tired he was. Slowly, she gave a nod. She spoke the word, fine, barely raising her voice above a whisper. But don't think I'm letting this go. Naruto gave her a little grin. Thanks, Ino. After a brief period of silence, Naruto got up. Let's eat. You wanted training, right? Let's not waste the day. Ino nodded, but her thoughts continued to race. She was aware of the terrible stories and speculations about what had occurred the previous evening. The idea of confronting the Headless Horseman made her stomach turn because he was no typical foe. Ino glanced at Naruto as they sat down to eat. She thought, I need to get stronger, as her determination solidified. Stronger for him. Stronger to protect the people I love. It was tense in the center of the hidden sand village. Even the typical howling sounded muted, while the wind blew grains of sand through the wind-swept streets. Gaara sat behind his desk in the Cage's office, his face solemn. He had learned of the Leaf Village slaughter, and the ramifications were alarming. Gaara whispered, this is madness, disturbing the eerie silence. Although he spoke calmly, there was a flurry of thought in his eyes. Kankuro and Temari, his siblings, entered his office as the door swung open. It was obvious that they had heard the same news. Temari's face was fixed in a rigid line, and Kankuro's customary humorous smirk had vanished in favor of a worried expression. Gaara, Kankuro said in a solemn tone, we know what happened. It's all anyone's talking about. Gaara folded his hands on the desk and nodded. I assumed as much, but we won't discuss the specifics now. Our priority is the Cage Summit. Kankuro folded his arms and leaned against the wall. A week from now, right? Yes, Gaara said in agreement. That's when we'll decide our course of action. Temari took a step forward, frowning. There's something else we need to address. I've been thinking about the implications, Naruto. When his name was spoken, Gaara's eyes grew piercing. What about him? Temari paused and then stated, the horseman was released using his blood. That's no coincidence. Naruto's bloodline is rare, perhaps even unique. If he were to join forces with them. She was silenced as Gaara held up a hand. His eyes softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Naruto is on our side. He's proven his loyalty time and time again. Temari nodded, but her face was still tense. I know, but we can't ignore the possibility. If the wrong people manipulate him, or if he feels betrayed. Gaara's eyes went dark. That's why we must treat him with care and respect. If we begin to see him as a threat, if we push him away, we risk driving him into the arms of those who would exploit his power. Kankuro scowled. But how can you be sure? How do you know he wouldn't turn on us? With a contemplative gaze, Gaara reclined in his chair. It's the nature of humanity, Kankuro. When someone feels isolated, mistrusted, or condemned, they begin to see the world as their enemy. If Naruto senses that we fear him or blame him for the horseman's actions, he will feel the weight of that suspicion. It will grow inside him like a poison, feeding on his doubts and insecurities. He hesitated, staring off into space as though he were remembering something unpleasant. Trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to build but can be shattered in an instant. If Naruto falls into darkness, it won't be because of his power or the horseman. It will be because we failed him. And if that happens, there will be no one strong enough to stop him. Gaara's words soaked in, and the room fell silent. Kankuro shifted uneasily, and Temari's face was pale. The silence was finally broken by Temari. If that's true, then we have to be careful. Not just us, but everyone. The other Cage need to understand this too. Gaara gave a nod. Yes. But I can't guarantee they will. Fear makes people act irrationally. It blinds them to reason and fuels their worst instincts. With a determined look on his face, Kankuro pushed off the wall. Then we'll have to make sure they see things clearly. We can't afford to let Naruto become our enemy. Gaara's gaze grew softer. Exactly. We must stand by him, not out of fear of what he could become, but because it's the right thing to do. The smell of sweat and blood filled the air of a gloomy lair in the distance. A single torch's faint light wavered across the wet stone walls, creating spooky shadows that appeared to dance maliciously. A man knelt over a quivering figure in the middle of the room. The girl's eyes were wide with fear, and her body was frail and bruised. The man got to his feet while she lay there, her strength gone. He was towering and commanding, with a heavy cowl covering his face. His atmosphere of unadulterated malevolence was oppressive in and of itself. His voice was cold and uncaring, and he smiled twistedly down at her. He said, "You served your purpose," in a bland voice. She was crumpled on the floor like an abandoned doll as he moved away. He turned to the assembled men in the room and spoke authoritatively. "The Cage Summit is in a week. We'll use it as an opportunity to send our message. The world will see our power, and they will tremble before us." With cruel joy on their faces, the men surrounding him cheered. They all yelled, "Yes, leader," as their voices reverberated off the stone walls. They were silenced as the leader held up a hand. "Our attack will show them that no one is safe, not even the cage. Let them believe in their false sense of security. We'll shatter it in one decisive blow." The men's eyes were bright with anticipation as they nodded enthusiastically. "Get yourselves ready," the leader went on. "When the time comes, we'll strike with all our might, and the world will know true fear." Once again, with bloodlust in their voices, the guys cheered. With a somber expression, the leader's eyes returned to the girl on the ground. Her body shook and she gave a little whimper, but he ignored her. He whispered to himself, "The world will burn," his voice scarcely heard above the clamor. "And we will rise from the ashes as its true rulers." Wisps of white clouds were scattered across a broad area of pale blue sky above the training grounds. The smell of fresh grass was carried by a light breeze that rustled the leaves. In spite of the calm environment, Naruto and Ino's relationship was anything but calm. Standing in the middle of the clearing, Ino's body shook under the weight of the training equipment Naruto had fastened to her. Every time she moved, the heavyweights held onto her arms and legs and pulled her down. Her eyes were full of resolve, but sweat trickled down from her brow and soaked into her training clothing. Naruto's voice was firm yet steady as he said, "Are you ready, Ino?" Ino nodded while gritting her teeth. "Ready as I'll ever be." Crossing his arms, Naruto watched her intently. "Good. We'll start with something simple. Channeling your chakra into the wind isn't about brute strength. It's about control and precision." When he lifted his hand, a tiny burst of wind whirled around his palm. An adjacent tree branch was easily sliced through by the wind's sharp, cutting edge. With a gentle thud, the branch hit the floor. "Your turn," he replied as he took a step back. Ino inhaled deeply while concentrating on the whirling energy within herself. She reached out, attempting to imitate Naruto's move. Around her, the wind swirled, but it was erratic and distracted. The air faltered for a second and then vanished completely. Naruto scowled. "Not bad, but you're trying too hard to force it. Let the wind flow naturally. Feel its rhythm, and guide it, don't command it." With her face reddened from the effort and Naruto's intense focus, Ino nodded. She tried to stop her heart from pounding by closing her eyes. She held out her hand once more, this time paying attention to the faint currents surrounding her. A small but discernible vortex formed as the wind started to agitate. Naruto answered, "Better," with a tiny smile tugging at his lips. "But you'll need to push harder if you want real results." He put his hands on her shoulders and moved behind her. His contact gave Ino a shock of electricity, but she soon regained her focus. "Feel that?" he whispered softly. "The wind isn't just around you, it's within you. Tap into it." Ino steadied her breathing and nodded. She focused, attracting the wind to her center and letting it out in a deliberate outburst. The vortex cut through the air with a gentle whistle, sharper this time. Naruto took a step back, his face solemn. "Not bad. Now, let's increase the difficulty." He pointed to a line of wooden targets arranged along the clearing's perimeter. "Your goal is to cut through those targets. Focus on precision and power." With her muscles groaning under the strain of her exercise equipment, Ino straightened her shoulders. Lifting her hand, she called forth the wind again. Her wind blade impacted the first target, shattering it, but the second and third targets held together. "Don't stop," Naruto yelled. "Don't stop until you hit them all." Ino forced through the tension by clenching her jaw. She sent another surge of wind toward the remaining enemies by channeling her chakra. The third target remained solid while the second one broke. Her breath came in sharp gasps as her arms shook. "I can't," she held her breath. Naruto squinted his eyes. "You can. You're not giving up now, Ino." He picked up a large wooden staff and walked over. "If you want to get stronger, you'll have to endure more than this." He swung the stick quickly in the direction of her legs. Ino staggered under the weight of her equipment and narrowly avoided it. With startled eyes, she yelled, "What are you doing?" "Testing your reflexes," was Naruto's cool response. "In battle, the enemy won't wait for you to catch your breath. They'll attack relentlessly. You need to be ready. He swung once more, aiming for her side this time. The movement was slow but efficient as Ino twisted. Good, said Naruto. But faster. The training got more intense. Ino had to duck and parry while keeping her wind control as Naruto kept hitting with the staff. Her strikes became more accurate and her movements more flowing. At last, the final target broke under her wind blade. With her chest heaving, Ino fell to her knees. Gaping, I did it, she said. Naruto grinned. Not bad, but we're not done yet. Ino's gaze expanded. What, Naruto, I can barely move. With a tiny softening of his attitude, Naruto knelt before her. You said you wanted to get stronger, right? This is what it takes. No breaks, no shortcuts. He got up and offered to help her up. Come on, we've still got a long way to go. After hesitating, Ino accepted his hand and stood up. Despite the pressure causing her legs to shake, she managed to steady herself. All right, she responded, her eyes flaming with resolve. Let's keep going. As they resumed their workout, the sun sank lower in the sky. Using the weighted equipment, Naruto forced Ino to do laps around the clearing, pushing her to the limit. She struggled against gravity with every stride, but she persisted. Faster! Naruto yelled, his voice piercing the night sky. Ino's muscles screamed in anguish as she clenched her teeth. Despite being pulled down by the weights, she persisted with steadfast focus. Naruto remarked, good, as she finished another lap. Now, let's see how you handle a moving target. Each of the shadow clones he made was equipped with a wooden stick. They encircled Ino, their faces reflecting Naruto's unwavering resolve. It was his command, defend yourself. The clones launched a coordinated onslaught, their blows accurate and quick. With her arms outstretched, Ino did her best to dodge and block. Sharp gusts from her wind control helped deflect some of the hits. However, the clones persisted. They put pressure on her, making her adjust and respond fast. Ino became more assured in her moves and more deliberate in her blows. One clone after another was defeated by her. Crossing his arms, Naruto observed from the sidelines. Not bad, he said in a low voice. At last, Ino triumphed, the final clone vanishing in a cloud of smoke. Her body was completely exhausted when she fell on the ground. Naruto approached her and offered her a water bottle. You did well, Ino, but remember. Her eyes were barely open as she gazed up at him. We're not finished yet. With a moan, Ino forced a feeble smile. I wouldn't expect anything less. Naruto sat next to her and laughed. Good. Rest up for now. Tomorrow, we push even harder. With her head resting on his shoulder, Ino nodded. Thanks, Naruto, for believing in me. Naruto put a palm on her head and his eyes softened, always. The abandoned settlement was bathed in a pale glow as the moon hung high in the sky. The only sounds were Naruto's footsteps crunching rhythmically on the dirt path and the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Ino was sound asleep on his back, her arms slackly slung across his shoulders. In sharp contrast to the uncanny quiet around them, her gentle snores disturbed the serenity. With his face flushed from feeling her body weight against him and her chest pressing against his back, Naruto repositioned his grip. His cheeks flushed as he thought, of all nights for her to fall asleep like this. Nevertheless, unwilling to disturb her sleep, he maintained a steady pace. She earned a moment of tranquility after pushing herself to the maximum during training. He was struck by how empty the village felt as he strolled through its deserted streets. All the windows were gloomy and inhospitable, and all the doors were closed. The entire community seemed to have disappeared into the darkness, leaving only shadows in their wake. As he looked over the deserted streets, Naruto mumbled to himself, are they really this scared? After spreading like wildfire, the story of the Headless Horseman now seemed to cling to the villagers' hearts with an unwavering terror. He went by the market area, which is typically busy even at this hour. It was a ghost town now. Naruto furrowed his brows. He said, all this because of one man, in a scarcely audible voice. Pathetic. He was about to round a corner when a well-known person appeared. Sakura. Her eyes were downcast and her thoughts were obviously elsewhere as she walked slowly. She was barely a few steps away before Naruto noticed her. Sakura looked up, her eyes a little wider at what she saw. Slumping on Naruto's back in her training clothes, Ino's long hair hung over her shoulder. She was so exhausted from the rigorous exercise that her clothing were sticking to her, even while she slept. Sakura looked at Naruto for a minute, but he remained silent. His face was expressionless as he merely strolled by her. Sakura's heart tightened as she clenched her fists at her sides. He didn't even greet me. She kept her gaze on Naruto's vanishing form. A twinge of jealousy stabbed through her. After always avoiding Naruto, Ino was now practicing alongside him and spending time with him in ways Sakura had never thought possible. Her mind racing, she bit her lip. Why her? Why now? Sakura shook her head and laughed bitterly. A whisper, I must be losing it, she said. But the image of Ino sleeping soundly on Naruto's back, which should have been consoling but instead made her envious, would not leave her. Unspoken words and unresolved feelings weighed heavily on her heart as she turned and walked on. At last, Naruto arrived at his flat. The unusual tension in the air, in addition to Ino, had made the trip longer than usual. He used his foot to push the door open and entered, where the floorboard's recognizable creak welcomed him. As he kicked the door shut, the apartment's warmth enveloped him. Naruto carefully adjusted Ino's position by shifting her weight. She mumbled something incoherently while she slept, and her head lolled a little. With a sigh, Naruto walked through the darkened living room in her bridal gown. Using his foot to pry open the door, he entered her chamber, the little room softly lit by the bedside lamp. He placed her on the bed gently, letting her head rest against the pillow. She murmured something, her lips moving slightly as she stirred. Curious, Naruto leaned closer. Stay, Naruto-kun. Naruto blinked with surprise. A small smile appeared on his face, and his heart skipped a beat. She's defiant even when she's sleeping. Carefully snuggling her in, he drew the blanket over her. He stood there for a moment, watching her sleep. Her expression was calm, devoid of the piercing wit and confidence she usually conveyed. She appeared both delighted and vulnerable. Naruto murmured, "Rest up, Ino," in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. Kurama's voice echoed in his head as he turned to go. Hasn't she become connected to you? With his palm resting on the doorframe, Naruto stopped at the entryway. With an unreadable expression, he looked back at Ino. Seems that way, he said softly in response. Kurama laughed. You're not as ignorant as you once were, are you? Without replying, Naruto walked back to the living room and shut the door. With a heavy sigh, he collapsed onto the couch as the day's burden finally caught up with him. He just stared straight ahead for a time, his mind a jumbled mess. He extracted a battered notebook from beneath the couch, its edges ragged from years of use. He opened it, took a pen off the table, and started writing. Kurama agitated once again. Are you still using that outdated method? Naruto didn't raise his head. It helps, was all he said. What does it help with? Going back in time? Kurama spoke in a skeptical tone. Hovering over the page, Naruto's pen hesitated. He inhaled deeply and closed his eyes. No, he finally said. It helps me remember why I keep going. Kurama sighed. You're a peculiar child. Naruto's eyes darted sideways as he grinned. You've known that for years. With the exception of the pen scratching on paper, the room became quiet once more. Naruto eventually leaned back and looked up at the ceiling. He muttered, Kurama, in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. Yes? At the Cage Summit, do you think they'll blame me for the Headless Horseman? After a little period of silence, Kurama began in a hesitant tone. Are you concerned that they may blame you because of your connection? Naruto gave a nod. After everything I did for them, if they think I'm part of this. His hand gripped the notebook tighter as he trailed off. Sighing, Kurama's deep voice resonated in Naruto's head. I'm not sure, child. Humans are erratic. They may not. Leaning his head back against the couch, Naruto closed his eyes. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess you're right. The weight of unsaid fears hung heavily in the air as the room fell silent again. This time, Kurama's voice was softer, nearly soft. You're not alone, though, no matter what. Keep it in mind. A dim flicker of resolution flickered in the depths of Naruto's eyes as they opened. He put the journal away and closed it while gazing into the night. Softly, thanks, Kurama, he said. Naruto sensed the fox's steady, steadfast presence even if he didn't respond. The village outside remained silent and engulfed in fear as the night dragged on. However, a silent resolve started to grow inside Naruto's flat, prepared to take on whatever came next. The community was tucked up in the peaceful cocoon of sleep, and the night was calm. Stars were scattered across the sky, their dim light just breaking through the heavy cloud cover that hung overhead. Except for the distant clip-clop of hooves, all was quiet. Like the ticking of a ghoulish clock, the sound grew louder, more constant, and more relentless. It was the Headless Horseman. There was an odd grace in the way his steed, a huge black beast with brilliant red eyes, moved. Even in the cool night air, its breath was evident in thick, ghostly puffs. The horseman. A massive figure clad in ragged, dark armor, sat on its back. The dim, sinister glow emanating from his severed neck served as an unsettling replacement for the missing head. The horse stopped just beyond the edge of the village when he pulled the reins. The horseman sat motionless for a minute, looking around. His invisible eyes scanned every inch of the sleeping community, every shadowed nook and cranny of the roadway. Then he heard it, a sound that cut through the stillness of the night. Laughter. His horse's ears perked up toward the source as it moved its head. The horseman propelled it ahead, leading the animal along a slender dirt trail that took it farther into the village. The sound became clearer and louder. It came from a house on the edge of town, where the windows let in warm light that softly illuminated the trees around it. A family was seated around a little table inside. The sound of children playing with their toys filled the air, their high-pitched giggles contagious. The parents' faces lit up with happiness and satisfaction as they observed. The shadow that now hung outside was a sharp contrast to the image of unadulterated joy. With his armored boots clattering silently on the ground, the horseman dismounted. He walked purposefully, like a predator, toward the home. He could see them all through the window. The kids running about the room, their cheeks flushed with joy. The parents leaning into each other, their eyes full with pride. The horseman remained motionless for a minute, seemingly enjoying the scene. Then he pulled his weapon in one motion. The enormous, sharp blade was smeared with the blood of innumerable victims. The air around it became oppressively heavy, as if it were humming with an unearthly energy. The edge caught the moon's dim light as the horseman lifted it high. He brought the weapon down on the front door with a single, powerful blow. In the silence of the night, the sound of the wood breaking and splintering was like a thunderclap. Screams of fear replaced the laughter of the family inside as they froze. The horseman was upon them before they could respond. It was the father who fell first. Before he could even get out of his chair, the horseman's blade mercilessly cut through his neck. With a painful thud, his head struck the floor, and a moment later, his body fell apart. Clutching her children to her chest, the mother let out a scream. The horseman, however, was unforgiving. With another quick sweep, he ripped her head from her body and dragged her out of the children's hands. Blood gathered around her as her lifeless body collapsed to the ground. The kids' tiny bodies trembled in terror as they wept. The horseman outran them when they attempted to run. His blade sang through the air as he caught them one by one. Their heads rolled across the floor, their dead bodies joining their parents in an expanding sea of blood, their cries drowned out. The house was now a charnel house, where there had once been warmth and joy. The horseman's armor was covered in blood as he stood amid the chaos. His headless form radiated a cold, emotionless delight as he examined his job. Then he started gathering the decapitated heads, as though to finish his hideous rite. His gauntleted hands were precise and unforgiving as he picked them up one by one. His horse waited calmly outside while he carried them. A huge, hollow tree stood nearby, its twisted branches extending like skeletal fingers toward the sky. The horseman went over to it and unlocked a secret compartment in the trunk. There was a horrifying assortment inside. Scores of heads with dead eyes gazing into space. He carefully, almost reverently, placed the fresh heads in the collection. Having completed his duty, he stepped back and closed the compartment. The horseman mounted his steed again without a word. With a bone-chilling neigh, the beast reared back, its fiery eyes flashing. It then threw itself into the darkness with a strong kick, carrying its rider out of the settlement. The quiet had returned, but it was not the serene serenity that had been previously. For those who woke up the following morning to discover their loved ones gone, the stillness would remain in their hearts since it was one that was laden with death and despair. Only blood, fear, and a terrifying memory of the headless horseman's wrath remained after his latest attack. Naruto sat alone himself at his desk, his messy room filled with flickering shadows from the weak illumination of a solitary candle. His pen had dropped from his fingers, and his hands were resting on a partially completed journal entry with still wet ink. Every second that went by made his eyelids heavier, and before he knew it, sleep had taken him. This was not your typical sleep, though. The dream arrived quickly, bringing him into a terrifying and gloomy world. He was in a lonely village with strangers all around him. Unaware of the impending disaster, men, women, and children led ordinary lives. There was the faint sound of hoofbeats as a chilly wind blew. Through the darkness came the headless horseman and his hideous mount. Despite the residents' cries, there was no way out. With speed and ruthlessness, the horseman's blade fell. Faces transfixed in horror, heads tumbled. The formerly idyllic community was turned into a cemetery, and the ground was covered in blood. Fear immobilized, Naruto could only watch as the horseman collected the severed heads, Then the tree appeared to him. The aged, twisted tree with its hollow trunk served as a hideous haven for the horsemen's grotesque awards. As though he were to blame for their demise, the heads gazed out at him with accusing eyes. Naruto felt his heart racing. The terrible stink of death overcame him as he felt the bile rise in his throat. He attempted to yell, but it was inaudible. The horseman turned to face Naruto in his headless form. The horseman slowly lifted a finger and pointed at him. Sweat soaked Naruto's body as he jolted awake. Every beat of his pounding heart echoed like a drum in his ears. He made an unsuccessful attempt to steady his breathing. He felt his legs give out under him, and his eyesight swam. He fell to his knees, unable to breathe. The residual fear gripped him like a vice, causing his hands to shake as he grasped at his chest. His mind flashed pictures of the tree and its gory contents. "No," he said in a raspy voice that was hardly audible. He was overcome with the want to throw up and staggered to his feet, making his way to the restroom. Just as he reached the sink, he started to throw up, convulsing as he threw up the contents of his stomach. The fear that seized his spirit was far worse than the acidic taste that scorched his throat. He slumped heavily on the sink after it was finished, breathing in short gasps. In an attempt to get rid of the residual fear, he washed his lips and sprayed his face with cold water. However, the dream's crushing weight persisted, and the visuals refused to go away. Naruto staggered past the desk and its incomplete journal entry and returned to his room. Rather, he walked to his bed and collapsed upon the edge, his body shaking with fatigue. "Ino's just next door," he said, looking at the wall next to it. "She's probably asleep." In an attempt to dismiss the idea, he shook his head. He did not wish to wake her. This was not how he wanted anyone to see him. "Kurama," Naruto said in a shaky whisper. "What's happening to me? Why am I seeing these things?" With a rumbling rumble, the enormous fox roused inside of him. "Because, Naruto, you are special. There's something inside you, something unique." With his nails sinking into his palms, Naruto clenched his fists. Growling, "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I didn't want to be special. I just wanted a normal life. Peace. Is that too much to ask for?" Kurama let out a sigh, his voice laden with regret. "Life doesn't always give us what we want, kid. You've been through more than most, and yet, you've kept going. That makes you stronger than you realize." In an attempt to slow his pounding heart, Naruto reclined on the bed, his chest rising and falling. "I'm tired, Kurama. I don't want to keep fighting. I don't want to carry this burden anymore." After a period of silent observation, Kurama spoke. "I know what you'll become, Naruto. But I hope you'll always choose the right path." Naruto remained silent. Rather, he closed his eyes and let fatigue to take him. With Kurama's comments still weighing on him, his breathing slowed and he fell into a restless sleep. In other places, the village is concealed by the leaves. Tsunade was slumped over her desk in the dark of night, with a half-empty sake bottle beside her. In her fatigue, the papers she had been working on were strewn around carelessly. The door suddenly sprang open, and Shizune hurried in, her eyes wide with fear and her face white. "Tsunade-sama." Tsunade moaned and struggled to raise her head. "What is it, Shizune? Can't it wait until morning?" Shizune said, "No, it can't," in a shaky voice. "There's been another attack. More victims. And their heads," she began, but her voice broke before she could finish. Tsunade's eyes opened wide, and the haze of slumber vanished in an instant. "Damn it," she mumbled as she forced herself to stand. "We can't keep waiting. We need to act now." Shizune questioned, "But what about the Cage Summit?" "We are eagerly anticipating the summit," Tsunade exclaimed. "We need to stop this monster before he claims more lives." In other parts of the village, Sakura woke up with a start, gasping for air as her chest heaved. Her mind was racing with uncontrollable thoughts as she gazed at the ceiling. She said, "Naruto, Ino," in a voice that was a little sad and frustrated. Why was seeing them together so upsetting to her? Why was it that every time she thought of him, she felt this pain in her chest? Was it envy? Feeling sorry? Her voice was hardly audible as she asked herself, "Do I love him? No, that's ridiculous, isn't it?" She put her hands over her face and tried to ignore the thoughts, but despite her best efforts, they continued to reappear, tormenting her like a tenacious ghost. Ino's room. Ino roused in her slumber, her face contorting in pain. Her dreams were full of hazy, frightening imagery, and she muttered incoherently. Her voice suddenly became clearer and louder. She slurred, "Stay away from Naruto-kun, you billboard brow." After saying it, under the sheets, she moved, her face softening as she fell back into a sound sleep. The village was far from peaceful in the nighttime calm. As the headless horseman's shadow drew closer and closer, each heart bore its own responsibilities and anxieties.
This was it for today. To watch next part, subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell notifications so you never miss an upload. Till then, see you next time.